Even if I say something absolutely totally false, just don't contradict. Don't go. Just shut the fuck up. I didn't say that part. That's part of my technique now. Um, Shut the fuck up and just let it in. And then we're not saying believe it forever. Saying let it in so you can actually entertain it. And then once you pretended like you believe it, you've looked at the evidence for it. If it still doesn't sit right, okay, fine. I mean, what are we gonna do? Okay, fine. But you can't learn it if all you're doing is talking about how it doesn't sit right. So don't don't put don't. I'll check in next year. Um, Ecstatic bliss triggered solely by wayward electrons? Why not? If you accept the studies of Toronto psychologist Michael Persinger, the same effect can be created with external stimulation of the brain. Volunteers don a cloth swimmer's cap outfitted with a grid of magnetic coils. Using the magnets to stimulate localized areas of the brain, Persinger has been able to generate feelings of a sense of presence, another self, or oneness with the universe. Actual patient descriptions. Those with a Christian upbringing often describe the presence of Jesus. Those with Muslim backgrounds often describe the presence of Muhammad. Also, frequently mentioned are profound emotions such as awe, joy, and a general sense of harmony and deep significance. Psilocybin will also get you there, though without being attached to any specific idea or belief. It isn't surprising that there is an ever-growing literature on the biological origin of the religious impulse. For example, why God won't go away, the God part of the brain, or that my mailbox is stuffed with invites to weekend conferences on neurotheology. The underlying point is both profound and self-evident, but don't feel bad. Even if the origination of the sense of God were extracorporeal, from a distant black hole, a past life, a dead relative, the rings around Uranus, or God in his or her heaven, the final pathway for the message's perception must reside within the brain. Chemical activation of mystical states is as old as the most ancient psychedelic. William James described the phenomena with several anesthetics: chloroform, ether, and nitrous oxide. The following chloroform-induced mystical experience is a good example of a chemically induced cognitive dissonance. The knowledge that the mystical experience is a result of mundane chemistry does not negate the nagging and lingering sense of the certainty of God's existence. Note also that chloroform evoked the sensations of purity and truth without any reference to any specific idea or thought. I had a friend who she smoked weed for the first time, and she was kind of she wasn't a super dynamic. She wasn't, it wasn't constantly. She wasn't talking your ear off. Let's say that. Um, and her answers tend to kind of be short. But now she's bubbly and she smokes. She says, "Oh my gosh, I've just got tons of so many thoughts. They're just racing, blah blah blah." And I was skeptical, but also hopeful. But she's described it before. I got so much to say, but I just don't, know how to say it. I've got lots of thoughts in here, but they just don't come out. I want to believe, a little skeptical, just waiting for that evidence. So here she is telling me her mind's racing with thoughts. I go, let's go. Out with it. She goes, no, I don't want to, because then I'm afraid that once I start, I won't be able to stop it. And I go, you're safe here. Let's go. No worries. Let's go. We can play a game, whatever. I'm here for it. I can keep up with you. Let's go. And it'll wear off. Don't worry. She said, really? It'll wear off? I said, yes. Obviously, we will wear off. Yeah, before we go to sleep. Yes. Now, what about those thoughts that were racing through your mind? Oh, I don't know. It's just, I'm just so many things. I'm thinking about, like, I'm noticing this and that. Okay, those are things in the room that you're looking at. But what about all those thoughts in your mind? It's just, oh gosh, it's just, I'm overwhelmed by all these thoughts. All right, never mind. Okay, so you ready? So note also that the chloroform evoked the sensations of purity and truth without any reference to any specific idea or thought. I cannot describe the ecstasy I felt. Then, as I gradually awoke from the influence of the anesthetics, the old sense of my relation to the world began to return, and the new sense of my relation to God began to fade. Think of it. To have felt purity and tenderness and truth and absolute love, and then to find that I had, after all, had no revelation, but that I had been tricked by the abnormal excitement of my brain. Yet this question remains. This is William James talking. Okay. Yet this question remains. Is it possible that the inner sense of reality was not a delusion, but an actual experience? Is it possible that I felt what some of the saints have said that they always felt? The undemonstrable but indisputable certainty of God? Even William James, bro. I did shrooms, and yes, I felt all kinds of truth, blah blah. But even during it, my dad asked me, "I feel like he wasn't interested in spiritual stuff. But do you feel seeing more details?" I was like, "I confirm. I had the impression that I'm seeing more details. I do not believe that I'm actually processing more details. I am spending more time with it, but my processing rate, I don't think, has changed." Um, and uh, and I said, and he said, "What do you mean? Either it's changed or it isn't." I said, "Look, I feel like it has. I have an impression it has. What the fuck is an impression? What does that mean?" Oh gosh, he's coming tomorrow. In the following ether-induced example, another subject confirms the power of the mystical experience to feel as if a greater knowledge. Another subject confirms the power of the mystical experience to feel as if a greater knowledge than objective evidence. In that moment, the whole of my life passed before me, including each little meaningless piece of distress, and I understood them. Wait, hold on. Are we doing a quote? What's happening right now? Yeah. Okay. In that moment, the whole of my life passed before me, including each little meaningless piece of distress, and I understood them. This was what it had all meant. This was the piece of work it had all been contributing to do. I perceived also in a way never to be forgotten the excess of what we see over what we can demonstrate. Volunteers undergoing intravenous ketamine infusions, an anesthetic molecularly similar to the street drug PCP or angel dust, frequently experience a profound clarity of thought. One subject described a sense of understanding everything, of knowing how the universe works. Such descriptions are quite similar to those who have had near-death experiences from a cardiac arrest or an anesthetic complication. Indeed, there may be a common mechanism of action. Lack of adequate brain oxygen characteristically triggers the release of the neurotransmitter glutamate. Under normal conditions, glutamate binds to NMDA to NMDA receptors. In excessive amounts, it is neurotoxic and facilitates neuronal death. Under normal conditions, glutamate binds to NMDA receptors, but in excessive amounts, it is neurotoxic and facilitates neuronal death. In an attempt to prevent this cell death, the oxygen-deprived brain also releases protective chemicals that block the effect of glutamate on NMDA receptors. Ketamine has a similar NMDA receptor blocking effect. So does MDMA, ecstasy, another psychoactive drug known to produce feelings of mental clarity. It is now believed that this blocking of the NMDA receptor is responsible for the clinical picture of a near-death experience. Section: Voices from the Limbic System. With each of the earlier descriptions, we're at the mercy of brief, highly emotionally charged, and difficult to reproduce patient reactions. Fortunately, we have a more consistent, controlled, and reproducible method for eliciting these mental states of knowing. Fuck. Fortunately, we have a more consistent, controlled, and reproducible method for eliciting these mental states of knowing. Formal brain stimulation/mapping of the temporal lobe limbic system. As we proceed, keep in mind that brain mapping is the same technique that neurologists have used to localize other primary brain functions, such as motor movements, vision, and hearing. But first, a word about the limbic system. Though some neuroscientists question its existence as a specific entity, the term limbic system is useful for discussing those regions of the brain fundamental to the most primary and basic emotions. God, people are so fucking behind. Everyone wants to talk about, oh yeah, the brain, it's like, tells your organs what to do, and it does motor stuff. Other things? I don't think so. It includes the evolutionarily oldest regions of the cortex and subcortex, the cingulate gyrus, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, and a variety of basal forebrain structures, including the ventral tegmental area, the site of the brain's primary reward system, as well as associated regions of the frontal cortex that are implicated in emotional responses and decision making. Unfortunately for lab animals, the easiest emotion to study is good old-fashioned terror. Enter Joseph Ledoux, professor of neuroscience at New York University, with his provocative and ingenious series of experiments. Ledoux conditioned rats to associate the sound of a ringing bell with electric shocks applied to their paws. After being conditioned, the sound of the bell without the electric shocks was sufficient to provoke a typical fear response. Momentary cessation of body movement, change in heart rate, blood pressure, sweating, and release of stress hormones. Ledoux set out to find the pathways that produce this fear response. He found that cutting the rat's acoustic nerves, the neural connection between the ears and the brain, abolished the fear response. The sound of the bell didn't reach the brain. If he left the nerves intact, but surgically removed the auditory cortex, the region of brain that processes and creates the conscious awareness of sounds, the rats no longer heard the sound. Yet, the fearful behavior persisted. Just as the phenomenon of blind sight is based upon visual information being transmitted to and processed in areas other than the visual cortex, Ledoux surmised that the sound of the bell the inferior collicus, right, reaches other, the sound of the bell reached areas of subcortical, there's no word other, okay. Ledoux surmised that the sound of the bell reached areas of subcortical brain, reach areas of subcortical brain capable of triggering the fear response without the rat consciously hearing the bell. Ledoux was able to demonstrate the presence of neural pathways that bypass without the rat consciously hearing the bell. Yeah, because if the information is processed in the temporal lobe, it's consciously heard. Yeah. Ledoux was able to demonstrate the presence of neural pathways that bypass the auditory cortex, connecting directly with a temporal lobe structure, the amygdala. Does it not pass through the inferior colliculus? Ledoux was able to demonstrate the presence of neural pathways that bypass the auditory cortex, connecting directly with the temporal lobe. All right, put a comment. Long known to be crucial to the amygdala, long known to be crucial to the recognizing, processing, and remembering of emotional reactions, including the fear response. From the amygdala, these nerve fiber pathways continue to regions of the hypothalamus that control the sympathetic nervous system, leading to increased heart rate, blood pressure, and sweating, as well as to regions of the brain stem. So it's after. As well as to regions of the brain stem that control reflexes and the facial expressions of fear. Okay, so Ledoux was able to demonstrate the presence of neural pathways that bypass the auditory cortex, connecting directly with the temporal lobe structure, the amygdala, long known to be crucial to the recognizing, processing, and remembering of emotional reactions, including the fear response. From the amygdala, these nerve pathways continue to regions of the hypothalamus, next door, kind of, that control the sympathetic nervous system, or not, I don't know, but I mean, close enough, right? Anyway, I can't point differently is what my point is. That control the sympathetic nervous system, leading to increased heart rate, blood pressure, and sweating, as well as to regions of the brain stem that control reflexes and the facial expressions of fear. Ledoux's experiments greatly clarified the role of the amygdala in evoking a fear response without the need for any conscious awareness and recognition of the provoking stimulus. Other experiments have confirmed that direct stimulation of the amygdala produces the same fear response as Ledoux's conditioning experiments. Conversely, bilateral removal of the amygdala in animals, from rats to monkeys, produces a state of utter fearlessness. Knocking out a single gene active in the amygdala can greatly diminish the fear response in rats. This fearlessness has also been observed in those rare patients with bilateral amygdala damage. Every structure is bilateral, right? So imagine this is the amygdala, little almond thing, right? Okay, bilateral meaning took them both. Okay, great. This fearlessness has also been observed in those rare patients with bilateral amygdala damage. Such patients characteristically approach new and potentially risky situations with a positive, unafraid attitude. One man with bilateral amygdala damage loves to hunt deer in Siberia while dangling from a helicopter. Another extensively studied patient, SM, a young woman with calcification and atrophy of both amygdalae, could not be startled by the unexpected blast of a 100 decibel boat horn. Despite repeated conditioning attempts, SM did not demonstrate any automatic changes such as rise in pulse or blood pressure. According to Antonio Damasio, the behavioral neurologist who has extensively investigated her deficits, SM can intellectually discuss what fear is, but the bilateral damage to her amygdala has prevented her from learning the significance of potentially dangerous situations. In Chapter 9, we will return to the amygdala's role in processing and creating memories of fearful events. As a result of such studies, neurologists now accept that the amygdala is necessary for the expression of fear. But the study of mental states that defy precise classification, such as déjà vu or a sense of dread, is much more difficult. We have problems both in what to call them and how to standardize our observations. It is easy to recognize a scared rat, but a rodent's sense of alienation is less obvious. As a consequence, there are few formal and systematic studies. The closest that we have are the informal investigations carried out during the evaluation of patients with a particular form of epilepsy that originates from temporal lobe limbic structures. Most commonly as the result of a birth injury or developmental abnormalities, and occasionally due to a tumor, a patient can develop a particular form of epilepsy, a complex partial seizure. These spontaneous electrical discharges from temporal lobe limbic structures characteristically produce a transient, seconds to minutes, alteration or clouding of consciousness, often associated with the intrusion of other mental feelings, déjà vu, dread, fear, and even religious feelings such as those described by Dostoevsky. Their intensity varies from brief lapses in awareness to complete loss of consciousness and major convulsions. The frequency also varies greatly. Some patients have, we want to relax. No, I want to roll a joint. Or we spill water. Some patients have very few seizures. Some patients have very few seizures that are completely controlled with medication. Others, less fortunate, can experience upwards of several dozen seizures per day despite maximal medication. For the latter group, surgical removal of the damaged area of the temporal lobe can result in a striking reduction or a cessation of seizures. As the major risk of surgery is creating damage to adjacent vital areas, the operating neurosurgeon must first identify the functions of all surrounding brain tissue. The surgery can be performed under local anesthesia. The brain is insensitive to pain. Obviously, no pain, you know what I'm trying to say. Patients remain conscious and are able to describe exactly what they're experiencing. The surgeon systematically stimulates small areas of cerebral cortex. Patient responses are recorded. At the conclusion of this cortical mapping, the surgeon has an excellent correlation between brain anatomy and its function and can better avoid operating near critical areas. For our discussion, I've chosen 3 detailed series of operative brain mapping, temporal lobe stimulations that provide the most in-depth patient descriptions. To avoid possible cultural bias, I've included studies of patients from Canada, France, and Japan. Despite the obvious differences in background, culture, and language, the similarities remain striking. Though I have grouped patient descriptions according to general categories of experience, there is some degree of obvious overlap. Also, many of those feelings occur either concomitantly, concomitantly. I also need to see a definition. Oh, like at the same time. That's a great word. Okay. Spatial summation. Okay. Concomitantly. No, let's hear it.
Concomitantly.
Concomitantly. Concomitantly. Concomitantly.
Concomitantly.
concomitantly. What about American pronunciation? Okay, so many of these feelings occur either concomitantly or in rapid succession. I have also included some descriptions of the patient's spontaneous seizures. Cortical stimulations are labeled CS. CS, cortical stimulations. Spontaneous seizures are labeled SZ. Charlie Sierra, cortical stimulations. Sierra Zulu, spontaneous seizures. Each description is from a different patient. All italics are mine. As you listen to these voices of the limbic system, keep in mind that what these patients describe is not dependent upon any specific antecedent thought, line of reasoning, mood, personality quirk, or circumstance. A jolt of electricity is all that is needed. Right. That's huge, right? It's not like they're having some conversation and then talking about God or whatever and what it might mean, and while we're doing that I stimulate this or that someone had said something that was inspirational or whatever. No, bro. Section déjà vu and feelings of familiarity. Okay, so we have so what was SE again? Spontaneous seizures. Okay, so spontaneous seizure. I do not know where it is, but it seems very familiar to me. I feel very close to an attack. I think I'm going to have one. The familiar memory. Cortical stimulation. I have the impression of already having been here, that I had already lived through this. What is it again? Why did you forgetting this? Spontaneous seizure. Patient stated that a thought entered his head. Wait, what? The patient is saying this after having a spontaneous seizure? Who's saying this? Yeah, I'll show you what it looks like. That, see? Okay. All right. Spontaneous seizure. Patient stated that a thought entered his head which he seemed to have had before. It was something he had heard, felt, and thought in the past. He was unable to describe it. Spontaneous seizure. Suddenly, the patient experiences a sensation of recollection, which feels like a scene she had experienced somewhere in the past. She feels as if she has seen something familiar. As she tries to recall what it is, she feels a sense of pleasure. The author's comment. In this description, the familiarity is dissociated from memory, and the feeling of knowing appears in mind. Section. Jamais vu and other feelings of strangeness. Jamais vu or déjà vu is already seen. Jamais vu is never seen. Cortical stimulation. I had a dream. I wasn't here. I sort of lost touch with reality. Stimulation was repeated at the same site. A small feeling like a warning. The stimulation was again repeated. I was losing touch with reality again. Spontaneous seizure. He had a sensation of strangeness of words, as if he had never seen or heard them before. Spontaneous seizure. His aura begins with a sense that objects look bizarre, and that speech, although understood, sounds strange in an indefinable way. Cortical stimulation. Things are deformed. I'm another person, and I seem to be somewhere else. The patient also describes anguish with a feeling of imminent death. Cortical stimulation. From the age of 35, the patient had suddenly and transiently felt as if she were falling into another and fearful world. Cortical stimulation. He felt himself alone in another world, and he felt fearful. Spontaneous seizure. When he has an attack in his own room, he feels as if his room has been changed and has become strange. Section. Strangely familiar, a duet of opposites. So these aren't really sections, are they? These are groupings of these case studies. Strangely familiar, a duet of opposites. So we had déjà vu, we had jamais vu, and now we have Between the two, a duet of opposites strangely familiar. Descriptions that include simultaneous feelings of familiarity and strangeness. Spontaneous seizure, a brief dream without loss of consciousness, where suddenly he had a very strong memory of a scene that he has already lived through that nonetheless feels bizarre. Later, the scene was preceded by the impression of having already done what I'm in the process of doing. It seems to me that I've already lived through the entire situation with a feeling of strangeness and often of fear. I've experienced that. I've experienced that. I've experienced that a few times. And it feels like I've already played this game, but I don't remember almost what I'm supposed to do. It doesn't feel fearful to me. It's like I'm kind of it's like there's this question of, am I gonna make the same choices? Yes, I am making them, but it definitely feels like the first time I'm making them. But I've been in this situation before and made these choices before. Um, Spontaneous seizure begins with a feeling of fear, then an indefinable internal feeling of strangeness, sometimes associated with the emergence of old or recent memories, presented more as thoughts than as sensory images. Spontaneous seizure begins with a very agreeable aesthetic illusion that would appear to him as if it were magnificent, giving him great pleasure. At about the same time, intense thoughts would come to him, which he would accept uncritically. It could be a voice, like in a dream. He thinks that someone wished him harm, that people are saying bad things about him, but at the same time, he takes pleasure from this. Spontaneous seizure begins with a feeling of discomfort and epigastric constriction, a feeling of strangeness and unreality of the environment, with a vague feeling of déjà vu, already lived. Then loss of contact. Whoa, that's French neurologists were fucking boom, 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 boom. So deja. Well, I don't know why they came from French neurologists. Or whether just French, just they got a great way of naming that je ne sais quoi. Great. Or actually, it's just really in English. We liked a lot of our words. Okay, right, right. Perspective errors. Okay. So anyway, déjà vécu, already lived. Déjà vu, already seen. Jamais vu, never seen. Very good. Okay. I am. What? Oh, so still with the spontaneous seizure. I'm sorry. Let me start it over. Begins with a feeling of discomfort and epigastric constriction, a feeling of strangeness and unreality of the environment, with a vague feeling of déjà vu, then loss of contact. I am in a no. This is a new quote here. There's oh no, that's what you do when it's new pair. I'm in a small village where everyone knows each other. I had the impression of having seen those people, and I felt something in the stomach like a ball. That which I saw could have been anything. It's more like an idea than an image that was presented rapidly in a very fleeting manner. Some strange thing without relation to reality, moving, but not necessarily with lifelike colors. Spontaneous seizure begins with an indefinable feeling of fear, sometimes associated with an internal whispering voice, and then an intensely painful emotional state with a familiar resonance, like the memory of an emotion. Powerful stuff, guys. My aim in presenting these detailed descriptions is not to categorically identify the limbic system as the sole site of origin of the feelings, such as familiarity, realness, knowing, clarity of thought, and so on. It's okay if you did want to do that. But to show how these feelings that qualify how we experience our thoughts can be elicited both chemically and electrically without any antecedent triggering thought or memory. Familiar and real aren't conscious conclusions. That conscious system is a myth, right? But they're not conclusions of that mythical judge or pilot, as Niebuhr said. It's not that conscious tale, the rational tale, as Haidt said. Um, it's the dog. Familiar and real aren't conscious conclusions. Nothing is. Neither are strange and bizarre. They are easily elicited. I mean, sometimes you experience the conclusion sort of as it's happening, or you have the feeling of experiencing conclusions as it's happening, but there's not real conscious conclusions. in the sense of angelic conclusions of like, I am a little homunculus who can float out of this head, and I'm going to do this, and I conclude that. They are easily elicited without any associated reasoning or conscious thought. But what exactly are these mental states? A word of clarification is in order. Great, let's roll a joint and then we'll read chapter 4, classification of mental states. And that says it'll take 16 minutes. 24 Echo, 26 Golf. I'm sorry, I was missing you. Can we do this together? And I don't know why I keep doing this, because it's actually not even possible. You can't be looking at both things. But it feels possible. It feels like I'm about to do it. Chapter 4, the classification of mental states. This is a quote from Chongju, circa 200 BCE. The fish trap exists because of the fish. Once you've gotten the fish, you can forget the trap. The rabbit snare exists because of the rabbit. Once you've gotten the rabbit, you can forget the snare. Words exist because of meaning. Once you've gotten the meaning, you can forget the words. Where can I find a man who has forgotten the words so that I can talk with him? I'm not, fuck that up. Where can I find a man who has forgotten the words so I can talk with him? That's very good, right? I think we get that, right? I think I get it. It's like, that means he's gotten the meaning. He didn't need the references to the meaning, because he's got the meaning. Wittgenstein's observation that difficulties in philosophy eventually boil down to problems with language surely applies to the study of the mind. I love Wittgenstein. I can't really say that, I don't know it, but every time anybody who talks about it, it's always saying some fantastic things. Like more fantastic than the things he's hearing about other people. Except for if it's like Daniel Kahneman, maybe. Or Daniel Dennett, maybe. Or like Thaler. Like Shermer. I don't feel like Shermer's actually quoted very much. I was just trying to show off that I know names, but I can't actually think of anybody else who's quoted often. William James. Okay, no, but Wittgenstein more than William James. The present-day classifications of mental states are a huge obstacle to any deep understanding of how the mind works. While fear is obviously an elemental emotion, feelings from tip of the tongue to utterly strange, from totally real to otherworldly, are neither pure emotions nor thoughts. They are feeling tones. They're feeling tones that color our mental experiences. In writing this book, I've struggled with what to call these feelings and have come up short. Ideally, the label should be an accurate reflection of the underlying physiology. Oh, Damasio. The behavioral neurologist Antonio Damasio sums up our present state of ignorance. Deciding what constitutes an emotion is not an easy task. And once you survey the whole range of possible phenomena, one does wonder if any sensible definition of emotion can be formulated. And if a single term remains useful to describe all these states. Others have struggled with the same problem and concluded that it is hopeless. Psychologists commonly divide certain feeling states into primary emotions, such as happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, and disgust. And secondary or social emotions, such as embarrassment, jealousy, guilt, and pride. Envy would also be in there. We have our recent video on the MD chapter of The Art of Thinking Clearly. Methods of classification and the number of primary emotions vary depending upon what is being measured. And this is great. I can look at it. I'm doing just fine without any alcohol. I I'm able to keep going, and I'm not like, it's 4 o'clock, I'm super hot, but also my head is spinning and I just want to lie down, but also, it kind of feels worse now that I've lied down. And also in this heat, being drunk would just not be possible. So not this. That's not the the last time you saw me drinking from a bottle in a video. It's not the last time you'll see me doing that. But remind me about what I said here, I guess. But like, be chill. Methods of classification and the number of primary emotions vary depending on what is being measured, from universal facial expressions or basic motor activity to the language used when we talk about emotions. No one would question that embarrassment is a sickening feeling, and in common parlance is a full-fledged emotion manifested by obvious behavioral correlates such as a flushed face and a glance toward the nearest exit. But what about those so-called emotions that are so devoid of emotional tone that they feel more like thoughts? Is gratitude an emotion? A thought? Or a shifting combination depending upon yet other moods? DiMaggio did have a definition for mood versus thought. Versus emotion. Each morning I think about how, that was me talking. Each morning I think about how fortunate I am. I tell myself to be grateful, and I am. For me, gratitude feels like a comparison, an intellectual exercise rather than an emotion, though it might result in a sense of contentment, which is more of a mood than a raw emotion. I'm thankful for X, which implies being better off than Y. I cannot imagine feeling proud without being proud of something. We take pride in, are grateful for, embarrassed at, or bowed or by, or pleased with. To my knowledge, these more complex emotional states rarely, if ever, occur with complex partial seizures or brain stimulation studies, unless coincidentally provoked by an accompanying thought. So I know this, or I don't know this. That doesn't have to be tied to anything. But I'm feeling grateful. Just a general sense of gratitude, no. Pride, no. Apparently not. Embarrassed, no. That's kind of surprising, but don't know what to do with that. But shaving won't help. For me, gratitude feels like a comparison, an intellectual exercise rather than an emotion, though it might result in a sense of contentment, which is more of a mood than a raw emotion. I'm thankful for X, which implies being better off than Y. I cannot imagine feeling proud without being proud of something. The fact that you can't imagine it don't mean shit. We take pride in, are grateful for, embarrassed at, or are pleased with. To my knowledge, To my knowledge, these more complex emotional states rarely, if ever, occur with complex partial seizures or brain stimulation studies, unless coincidentally provoked by an accompanying thought or memory. There is no body of neurological literature demonstrating the isolated absence of pride or gratitude as the result of localized brain injuries. Okay. And is this a distinction between primary and secondary? Does that hold true for such emotions do not appear to be primary any more than magenta is a primary color. They are the end product of more elemental mental states. What about the other so-called primary emotions? What about the other so-called primary emotions? Surprise is a spontaneous emotion, is a spontaneous response to the unexpected. But being surprised by a good punchline to a joke or a great twist in a thriller requires some cognitive element. I'm using the term cognitive to refer to any form of thought, conscious or unconscious, as opposed to a feeling, mood, or emotion. What do any of these things mean? That's me, sorry. Also, a sense you expect one thing and experience something different. Yeah, so you have to have that cognitive expectation. Also, a sense of surprise is not easily elicited by brain stimulation. And happiness? Is this an emotion or a mood? One person's happiness is another's relief that things aren't worse. If emotions as basic as surprise are difficult to physiologically categorize, what would a reasonable approach be to the even more elusive feeling of knowing? Perhaps an analogous situation would be the stream of consciousness voice in my head. Though not audible, I do hear my internal voice in the same way as I see an object in my mind's eye. Both are sensory representations of internal states of my mind. So is the feeling of knowing. We perceive our external world through primary senses, such as sight, sound, and smell. We perceive our internal world through feelings, such as familiar or strange, real or unreal, correct or incorrect, and so on. Earlier, I mentioned that deja vu could be described as a mental sensation. The term mental sensation is stilted and unwieldy. Feeling still feels, exclamation point in parentheses, preferable. Yet, there are several compelling reasons for at least considering these feelings as sensations, as in a sense of conviction. Sensation strikes closer to the neurophysiological truth of a relatively discrete output from localized neural structures in the same way that vision is the sensory output of the eye and its related cortical areas of the brain. Sensation tends to minimize the emphasis on psychological factors. Talk of feelings encourages Sensation tends to minimize the emphasis on psychological factors. Talk of feelings encourages this relationship. All right, I'm with you, bro. Sometimes I got problems with language like that, and I'm like, yo, guys, you guys think I'm just full of shit with the semantics? But no, I understand that, Dr. Burton. Dr. Broughton. But the most practical reason to consider these mental states as sensations is that they are subject to certain physiological principles common to other sensory systems. If you cut the median nerve, the main sensory nerve, to your thumb, you cannot volitionally stop your thumb from feeling numb. When a sensory system has been affected, altered sensations are unavoidable. Similar phenomena occur within the brain. Consider the example of phantom limb pain. A man's arm is accidentally amputated. The region of the brain that previously received sensory inputs from the now missing arm undergoes changes that cause it to misfire. The tragic result is that the ghostly and often painful recreation of the missing arm, the so-called phantom limb, the tragic result is the ghostly and often painful recreation of the missing arm, the so-called phantom limb. I'm pointing at you right now. As with the median nerve injury, where you cannot will away the numbness, the amputee can clearly see that the arm is missing, yet cannot stop the disturbing phantom limb sensation. Fuck, I just burned my elbow, my right elbow. The same line of reasoning can allow us to rethink such bizarre beliefs as feeling that you are dead or that your prized antique desk is a cheap reproduction. We wouldn't expect that such beliefs we wouldn't expect that such beliefs, if the product of altered mental sensory systems, could be voluntarily overcome through reason or contrary evidence. The same logic also applies to the feeling of knowing. I hope there's going to be hope, though. During the height of his mental illness, Nobel Prize-winning mathematician John Nash, beautiful mind, believed that aliens from outer space were trying to communicate with him. He could not accept a full professorship at MIT because I'm scheduled to become the Emperor of Antarctica. When a colleague asked him how such a brilliant and logical man could believe such nonsense, Nash replied that both ideas had come to him in the same way. Both thoughts felt right. And the converse. If you've known someone with severe obsessive compulsive disorder, you have seen how they cannot rely upon what they should know to be true. Dr. Bertain, I didn't realize you were going to talk to me. And the converse, if you have known someone with severe obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, I don't think I have severe OCD, you have seen how they cannot rely upon what they should know to be true. They will repeatedly check the oven to be sure the gas is off. It's philosophical OCD. I mean, I guess it's probably the same systems. They will repeatedly check the oven to be sure the gas is off, triple check the locks that they can easily see are already locked, or count and recount their change. It is as though objective evidence cannot trigger a proper feeling of knowing, leaving OCD victims in a state of heightened doubt and anxiety. Yeah, that feeling of knowing, that is kind of foreign to me, bro. I've been saying, right? Haven't I? Check the tape. I think I have, right? I don't even know. But it doesn't cause me anxiety. It just causes me anxiety when other people act like they do know. Then I'm like, What's going on? All right, anyway, psychologists have recently begun to consider the role of pathological certainty and pathological uncertainty as they relate to schizophrenia and OCD. This is an intriguing possibility given that both mental disorders have a significant genetic contribution. My dad has pathological certainty, but I have pathological uncertainty. But he wouldn't agree with that. He's certain that I have pathological certainty. Maybe he's right. Could genetic differences play a role in how easily one becomes convinced or remains unconvinced? Might inherent variations in the expression of the feeling of knowing contribute to the characterological excesses of the know-it-all, the perennial skeptic, the doubting Thomas, or the patient with psychosomatic complaints who is sure that something is wrong despite negative tests? But I get ahead of myself. A classification of mental states might also be based upon the degree of neurological autonomy. The most elemental would be those feelings and emotions that are universal, deeply embedded in our neural circuitry and capable of activation independently of any thought. Further confirmation would be the demonstration of a relatively specific site of origination, as in the well-established relationship between fear and the amygdala or déjà vu in the temporal lobe. More complex states are those that tend not to be well localized or spontaneously arising and require some contribution from thought, memory, or conscious intervention. I'm sorry, I don't think I've been properly processing this. Of activation independently of any thought. Further confirmation would be the demonstration of a relatively specific site of origination, as in the well-established relationship between fear and the amygdala, or déjà vu in the temporal lobe. More complex states are those that tend not to be well localized or spontaneously arising and require some contribution from thought, memory, or conscious intervention. Shut the fuck up. Deja vu is universal and spontaneous. Guilt and regret are not. Ask Bill Clinton or Dick Cheney. Brain stimulation experiments or discrete brain lesions do not generate a disparaging internal commentary, an isolated sense of pride, indignation, guilt, or humility. No one is on record as having experienced a sense of irony as a primary epileptic aura. Some brain activities, such as hope, seem to defy categorization altogether. To summarize, by using these criteria of universality, relatively discrete anatomic localization, and easy reproducibility without conscious cognitive input, the feeling of knowing and its kindred feelings should be considered as primary as the states of fear and anger. It should be considered as primary as the states of fear and anger. Primary meaning it doesn't need conscious thought or whatever to trigger it, and also not well localized. Okay. Or spontaneously arising. So you say in 2008, the feeling of knowing, the recently defined relationship between fear or anxiety and conscious thought has spawned the concept of emotional intelligence. It is time for a similar examination of the role of the feeling of knowing in shaping our thoughts. So basically, for the classification of mental states, it's like, we don't know how would we do. Hey, it said it would take me 16 minutes. Look how long it took. Oh, you're not gonna see, but I see the time, 17:50. Okay. Bro, so we're just gonna do like a marathon book thing over the next few months. We're just gonna read a bunch of books. I have ADHD. That's how my mind works. One thing, focus on. You know what you're doing when you get up in the morning. You know what you're doing to tire yourself out. Okay. Chapter 5, Neural Networks. Essentially everything that, this is a quote from Joseph Ledoux, who did, what did we just learn? Fuck. A series of ingenious experiments. Fuck. Hold on. What have we been talking about? Oh, Echo 26 Golf. Talk about classifications of mental states. And before that, we talked about. All right, we go back. Joseph Ledoux was the seizure. No. Right, with the sound of the bell and the rats, and that it bypasses the auditory cortex, so the brain isn't aware of it. It doesn't reach global awareness, sort of. But so the present neural pathways that bypass the auditory cortex, connecting directly with the temporal lobe structure, the amygdala. Ledoux's experiments greatly clarified the role of the amygdala in evoking a fear response without the need for any conscious awareness and recognition of the provoking stimulus. Okay. Okay, chapter 5, Neural Networks. Oh, Echo 26 Golf, 1924 now. This is a quote from Joseph Ledoux. Amygdala. It doesn't need conscious input. Essentially, everything that the brain does is accomplished by the process of synaptic transmission. Yes. Brilliant quote from Joseph Ledoux. And it's brilliant just because the self-illusion is so strong, it's really fucking hard to see beyond it. To say that the brain doesn't need quantics or whatever, it doesn't need unexplained magic. Essentially everything that the brain does is accomplished by the process of synaptic transmission. If the feeling of knowing is a primary mental state, not dependent upon any underlying state of knowledge, then our next step is to see how the interaction of conscious thought and the involuntary feeling of knowing determines how we feel we know what we know. We needn't fret over the enormously complex details of the. Excuse me, buddy. Thanks, buddy. We needn't fret over the enormously complex. We needn't fret over the enormously complex details of the underlying neurobiology. What is important is a good grasp of the key elements governing brain hierarchical structure. By understanding how increasingly complex layers of neural networks emerge seamlessly into the conscious mind, we will have the foundation for seeing where contradictory aspects of thought collide and why certainty is contrary to basic biological principles. In this chapter, we will take a look at neural networks. Keep this in mind for when we work on it maps. If in the human brain, a typical neuron receives incoming information from approximately 10,000 other neurons. Each bit of information either is up to 10,000. Come on, guy. Each bit of information either stimulates, positive input, or inhibits, negative input, self-firing. The neuron acts like a small calculator. If the sum of the inputs reaches a critical threshold level, an electrical charge travels down the nerve fiber, axon, to the region where neurotransmitters are stored. Can you look it up? Look up an image? Go now and look at an image. And I'm going to read it again after. Go now. Okay. Each bit of information either stimulates, Okay. In the human brain, a typical neuron receives incoming information from approximately 10,000 other neurons. Each bit of information either stimulates or inhibits cell firing, like a vote up or a vote down. The neuron acts like a small calculator. If the sum of the inputs reaches a critical threshold level, whoa, my critical threshold level is 50 votes, like for me to fire. I've gotten 60 votes for me to fire, but I've gotten 5 votes for me to not fire. No, that's enough. That's over 50. I'm firing. If the sum of the inputs reaches a critical threshold level, an electrical charge travels down the nerve fiber. So basically, I do the calculation, and I go, yeah, I'm doing it. And I go, ugh, and then shooting out of my feet are little balls. And they're like keys that hit the next person. So that nerve fiber, that's like my legs or my whole body or something. Okay, so the neuron, so each bit of information either stimulates or inhibits cell firing. The neuron acts like a small calculator. If the sum of the inputs reaches a critical threshold level, an electrical charge travels down the nerve fiber, axon, to the region where neurotransmitters are stored. The transmitters are released into the synaptic cleft, a tiny gap between adjacent neurons. If a neurotransmitter finds a receptor on the adjacent neuron, the process will be repeated on this adjacent neuron. So this is one neuron. Got your input received by those dendrites who all vote. You got the summation, the vote counting. And maybe we transmit. No, what does that say? Oh, the threshold. Oh yeah, so that cell body, it's like, all right, yep, there have been enough votes because the calculation was such that there were, and then shoots it down the axon. It's pretty binary. I mean, the axon part. Either goes or it doesn't go, all or nothing, bro. Every step in the process of neuronal activity, from the most distant dendrite to the farthest axon terminal, so from, if these are my dendrites, and then my feet are the axon terminal. So I receive, gotta vote yes, vote yes, vote yes. I gotta vote no here, okay. Okay, great. Every step in the process of neuronal activity, from the most distant dendrite to the farthest axon terminal, is fine-tuned by a slew of control mechanisms. There are estimated to be at least 30 separate neurotransmitters with enzymatic steps in the creation and destruction of each transmitter, affected by everything from genetics to disease. Feedback loops alter the availability and receptivity of postsynaptic receptor sites, so the hands of that next guy, and even how cell signals signal and adhere to one another. Understanding these regulatory mechanisms is a major challenge of modern neurobiology. Despite a veritable symphony of interacting mechanisms, the neuron ultimately only has 2 options. It either fires or it doesn't. At this most basic level, the brain might appear like a massive compilation of on and off switches. But the connections between neurons are not fixed entities. Rather, they are in constant flux, being strengthened or diminished by ongoing stimuli. Connections are enhanced with use, weakened with neglect, and are themselves affected by other connections to the same neurons. Once we leave the individual synapse between 2 neurons, the complexity skyrockets. From individual neurons to 100 billion brain cells, each with thousands of connections. What do you mean brain cells? Are you including glial cells? Because many more if you're including, but if you're talking about neurons, okay. Although unraveling how individual neurons collectively create thought remains the holy grail of neuroscience, the artificial intelligence, AI, community has given us some intriguing clues as to how this might occur. Here's a nice synapse. That's the ball shooting out of my feet and into the hands or onto the fingers or whatever of... That was a weird thing to say, huh? A synapse. At a presynaptic terminal, top, small vesicles 20 to 30 nanometers in diameter, filled with neurotransmitter molecules, are waiting. Arrival of an action potential or spike induces a fusion of the membrane, some of the vesicles, so that a neurotransmitter can diffuse into the synaptic cleft and reach receptors not shown at the other side. which then open ion channels they are attached to. A synapse becomes more or less efficient, like when vesicles get bigger or smaller, or more or fewer release sites become available. While postsynaptically, the ion channels may increase or decrease in number and stay open during a longer or shorter period of time. So most, though not all, of the active processes are happening in the pre- and postsynaptic membrane. The result is called learning. I think that was a caption. Using the biological neuron and its connections as the model, AI scientists have been able to build artificial neural networks, ANN, that can play chess and poker, read faces, recognize speech, and recommend books on Amazon.com. While standard computer programs work line by line, yes or no, all eventualities programmed in advance, the ANN takes an entirely different approach. The artificial neural network is based upon mathematical programs that are initially devoid of any specific values. The programmers only provide the equations. Incoming information determines how connections are formed and how strong each connection will be in relationship to all the other connections, or weightings. We talked about this a lot with why rationality, pre-built rationality, all eventualities programmed in advance is, oh, but that's not how artificial neural networks work. But still, this the strong each connection and the weightings. Yeah, you can learn. Right. We're talking about learning. Okay, that's right. So be coming out of the womb rational, impossible. Can't have all the weights pre-programmed. Now, humans have some capacity to learn. Nothing like an AI. So we don't get to run enough tests, and we aren't very sensitive to the results of the test. And so it's not there's, yes, it's fluctuating, but not like an AI. There is no predictable solution to a problem. Rather, as one connection changes, so do all the others. These shifting interrelationships are the basis for learning. The AI community has labeled this virtual space where the weightings take place as the hidden layer. Within ANN, the hidden layer is conceptually located within the complex interrelationships between all acquired incoming information and delivery, and the mathematical code used to process that information, the majoret. In the human brain, the hidden layer doesn't exist as a discrete interface or specific anatomic structure. Rather, it resides within the connections between all neurons involved in any neural network. A network can be relatively localized, as in a specialized visual module confined to a small area of occipital cortex, or it can be widely distributed throughout the brain. Proust's taste of a Madeleine triggered a memory that involved visual, auditory, olfactory, and gustatory cortex, the multisensory cortical representations of a complex memory. With a sufficiently sensitive fMRI scan, we would see all these areas lighting up when Proust contemplated the Madeleine. That's it, theory, right there. Now you're seeing a photo of it, theory. And this is what it maps will look like, except, it'll be much more developed in the middle. And, oh no, but of course, we need the in livery OC, not just, we need the in livery as well, not just the anti livery. Okay, very good. Good to note. The hidden layer, a term normally considered AI jargon, offers a powerful metaphor for the brain's processing of information. It is in the hidden layer that all elements of biology, from genetic predispositions to neurotransmitter variations and fluctuations, and all past experience, whether remembered or long forgotten, affect the processing of incoming information. It is the interface between incoming sensory data and a final perception, the anatomic crossroad where nature and nurture intersect. It is why your red is not my red. Your idea of beauty isn't mine. Why eyewitnesses offer different accounts of an accident, or why we don't all put our money on the same roulette number. Different sit stems. That's the hidden layer, the sit stem, right? All the interpretive if-then rules. I have borrowed the term hidden layer from the AI community to highlight a crucial element of neurophysiology. All thought that manipulates ideas and information by shifting associations, relative valuations among myriad neural networks must also arise from these hidden layers. Because the hidden layer is such an important concept, let's follow the inner workings of an artificial neural network familiar to most of us, the book recommendations on Amazon.com. Anyone who has shopped on Amazon more than once has had the disquieting experience of having the website suggest additional books that you might enjoy. The software advising you is an artificial neural network program that compiles a database of all the book sites on Amazon that you visit. The first time that you log on to Amazon, there are no recommendations. The ANN has no idea of your preferences. Though the mathematical equations are in place, they're useless without your input. Then you begin surfing the site. Each click onto a book inputs information into the ANN database. Gradually, a pattern develops. Books become ranked in relation to each other, waiting. Depending upon whether you clicked onto the book only, pursued reading a sample chapter, or purchased the book. Obviously, for Amazon, a purchase will be more heavily weighted than a rejection after perusing a sample chapter. In effect, the ANN learns your preferences and which books, if recommended, you are most likely to buy. The ANN has forced the equivalent of neural links between your initial purchases and similar books at Amazon. If, when you first start using Amazon, you only search for and bought crime novels, further suggestions would be primarily in this genre, with some overlap to the most closely related areas like true crime or biographies of Sherlock Holmes. The more crime books you buy, the more the underlying neural network would be weighted toward recommending similar books. Then your wife fires a volley of disparaging comments about your reading taste. After some reluctant self-examination, you glumly concur. You agree to a moratorium on loading up on pulp fiction. Instead, you will only read existential philosophy and plays from the theater of the absurd. You click on Pinter and Beckett and order a copy of Waiting for Godot. The next time that you boot up Amazon.com, you'll still get crime novel recommendations, but at the bottom of the list is a recommendation for Camus' The Plague. Sounds a bit like a thriller, so you order the book. The next time that you sign on to Amazon, there are more recommendations for books by Sartre and Ionesco. Elmore Leonard's latest is further down the list. If you stop, I don't understand half these references. If you stop reading crime novels long enough, the weightings of crime novels within the database will gradually revert down to zero. That's uninhibiting. In essence, the program is learning your taste by keeping a detailed track of what you read, /don't read, and purchase/don't purchase. It is building a relational database, one that is continuously adjusted according to new experience. If you can say that a database is having an experience. If you like the hard-boiled dialogue of Raymond Chandler, it would seem logical that you would be more likely to appreciate Jim Thompson's The Grifters than if you preferred Henry James's prose. If so, some static algorithmic program might be able to make pre-programmed recommendations, but line-by-line programming cannot mimic the inconsistencies and unpredictable nature of taste. It will continue to give the same recommendation until it is rewritten. So, okay, I always say reason is not a possible biological system. But I've said recently, in an open system where there's possible new information, so you haven't prepared weights for. But I think I've taken that to mean, maybe I've gone too far with that. So reason, for all intents and purposes, could maybe be possible. With so imams. In the future, I imagine you have imams, right, which are identifiers of mullahs and arresters of mujahideen. Because mujahideen is about when you just keep giving bullshit justification, you're just completely convinced that you're right. And then mullahs are just the initial errors. So an imam would have learned all about this and be able to help people with that feeling of certainty with unhealthy and wrong beliefs. But what was it? But and could he be himself maybe be reasonable? She be reasonable. She yeah, it would be intense, but you could have a reasoning school where all it is just correcting reasoning instincts, and you just keep practicing and practicing and practicing and practicing. And we might need that as guardians to the AI, because we were going to rely on the AI to tell us what's reasonable and what isn't. But that's kind of scary. So we would have humans that dedicate years and years and years of study to becoming reasonable enough to be able to evaluate the AI suggestions. It won't be able to come up with those kinds of ideas, but to be able to check it. Now, maybe those aren't imams; those are someone else. Yeah, that's another role. Put a comment for what we should call them. Okay. So anyway, I'm sorry. No, I mean, yeah, all right. So, but line-to-line programming cannot mimic the inconsistencies and unpredictable nature of taste. Yeah, you need learning. It will continue to give the same recommendations until it is rewritten. By contrast, the An is continuously learning from its mistakes. It can monitor its recommendations by assessing your purchases. If it is right, if you buy both James and Leonard despite their apparent differences, the An will get immediate feedback about your idiosyncratic aesthetics. Subjectivity, whimsy, and all sorts of unpredictable correlations will be included in these weightings. Even the purchases of others affect the weightings. If 1,000 Elmer Leonard readers suddenly buy a Danielle Steele novel, you might become bombarded with recommendations for her latest romance. If we were to envision each book on Amazon as a neuron connected to all the other available books, neurons, we would have the beginning model of a neural network. How a book relates to another book is being constantly recalculated, reweighted, based upon the shifting relationships among all the books. An important conceptual point. The reader can keep track of which books he has clicked onto and tabulate his inputs. He can record the recommendations made by Amazon, the outputs. But the world's smartest AI consultant can't not tell him in advance why the An acted as it did. There is no underlying program or algorithm that contains a reason. The process depends upon the entire set of interrelationships, none of which are fixed. So for our mappets, maybe we couldn't. Yeah, I think but we're speculating, and we're with the mappets. We could imagine maybe this it triggered this it, which triggered this it. Hold on, I'm talking about two different things. I'm confused. Yeah, but we can. Yeah, we can make a map of how the different cognitive mechanisms may have interacted. But there isn't like an algorithm that contains a reason. Just learning. I'm not sure I'm understanding what I'm saying. The process depends upon the entire set of interrelationships, none of which are fixed. One cannot extract a piece of the network for independent observation any more than you can pull out a single strand of a Persian rug and infer what the rug's pattern might be. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Watch the videos on the K's score, I think, and the antilivery versus equilivery. Here is the sequence of events. Input. Clicking onto a book at Amazon.com. The hidden layer. Weighting of relationships among all books clicked on or purchased, which occurs within the interdependent formulations that comprise the guts of the neural network. Output. Recommendation for additional purchases. The simplest neural network involves a single input and a single output. More complex networks result from multiple inputs and multiple outputs. Now, let's up the ante and watch a human neural network in action. A bright light is briefly flashed into your eyes. The retina turns the flash of light into electrical data that travel along the optic nerves and into the brain. Input, in livery. But instead of a direct route to consciousness with a precise and unaltered duplication of the flash, the data first goes to a subconscious holding station where it is scrutinized, evaluated, and discussed by a screening committee representing all of your biological tendencies and past experiences. No, it theory. That, but better. This committee, or in the judge myth, or the judge metaphor, this committee meets behind closed doors, or the office metaphor, but I don't think I've really talked about that. This committee meets behind closed doors, operating outside of consciousness in the hidden layer. Consider each committee member as being one set of neural connections. One might represent a childhood memory of having seen a similar flash of light when a toaster shorted out and started an electrical fire. The second is a general alarm system that has recently become highly sensitive and vigilant to the possibility of terrorism. The third is a composite memory of rock concerts. The fourth is a genetically based predisposition for a heightened startle reflex for bright lights. Boom. Just listed four its. Each member has his own opinion, and each one gets one vote. Boom. No. No, because there could be repeated firing, we learned recently, and then also whether something's in the facilitated zone or the discharge zone. They don't just get one vote. After hearing all the arguments, each committee member casts his vote and they are tallied, weighted. At the most elemental level, a decision is made, either to entirely suppress the flash or send it to consciousness output. No. Stop with the consciousness. The degree of awareness generated is yet another function of this decision, ranging from a barely noticed flash at the periphery of vision to a bright flash front and center. The childhood memory votes yes. Send the flash into awareness. The terrorist alarm network, fearing that the flash could indicate an explosion, votes yes. The rock concert memory is blasé, has seen the same flashes a zillion times at rock concerts, and feels the flash should be ignored. It votes no. The genetic predisposition reflexively votes yes. The third member is outvoted, and the flash is sent on high priority into consciousness. You look around, heart pounding, on high alert for anything from a gunshot to a terrorist bomb exploding. But you are at a wedding, and everyone is taking pictures of the bride. You sigh and tell yourself not to be so anxious. The next time a similar flash is received, the committee reminds each of the members that last time was a false alarm. Some of the committee members who previously voted yes now feel sheepish and don't vote. Nah, they still vote, but they're pied by another mechanism. That's how I would say it. Some of the committee members who previously voted, they have one job, bro, to put their vote in when they're elicited, when they're convoked. It's got to be. I think it's got to be another mechanism. No, I see. I get it. Because there is that sort of feedback. There's that memory in the cell, right? Of like, or there's some kind of I fired recently. I don't know. Great question, Dr. Bertain. Okay. The next time a similar flash is received, the committee reminds each of the members that last time was a false alarm. Some of the committee members who previously voted yes now feel sheepish and don't vote. The committee votes to nearly completely suppress the image. The genetic predisposition is ignored, so you barely notice the flashbulbs going off while you watch your child play Elmer Fudd in his grammar school play. Why'd you switch from... Oh, the next time. Okay. Eventually, if the committee is presented with a flash enough times and there's no explosion or fire, even the most nervous committee members reluctantly give up their alarmist posture. At this point, you could say that the neural network was heavily weighted towards suppression of the incoming flash. Bro, as I'm reading this, I mean, I might as well have a book out there, bro. I mean, I'm literally like on that level, bro. Because he thought it was worth talking about this metaphor, and I think it is as well. Sometimes I think, like, do all I have is metaphors? But that's okay. That's how humans learn things and come to understand things. Metaphors are actually super important. Eventually, if the committee is presented with the flash enough times and there's no explosion or fire, even the most nervous committee members reluctantly give up their alarmist posture. At this point, you could say that the neural network was heavily weighted toward suppression of the incoming flash. Unless there was a subsequent alternative outcome, such as a fire or an explosion, the vote would evolve into a rubber stamp veto. Professional photographers pay no attention to other flashing cameras, unless they think that they are getting scooped. In this schema, other committee members represent, each committee member represents a neural network with its own particular bent or bias. With the possible exception of some hardwired genetic tendencies, each member is also capable of listening to and being influenced by other networks. If he likes another network's view of the world, he might reach out and join ranks by enhancing the connections with this other network. Conversely, if he does not, he may reduce his connections with the offensive member network. With the offensive member network. It is not possible to know how each member is going to respond without knowing how each of the other members will respond. Everyone is constantly watching everyone else. That's the hard thing about figuring out a K-score. Everyone is constantly watching everyone else, with each decision being influenced by what the others are doing. To get an idea of the magnitude of this process, imagine billions of committee members, each with at least 10,000 hands. I think it's up to 10,000 hands reaching out to shake hands, prod, poke, seduce, or fend off the other members. Miraculously, this orgy of utter chaos is transformed into a relatively seamless and focused stream of consciousness. Even given the amount of potential information incoming at any second, we can focus on a single aspect of consciousness and either not notice or ignore the enormous subconscious din. The schema of the hidden layer, not by choice. Are you saying by choice? Even given the amount of potential information incoming at any instant, we can focus on a single aspect of consciousness and either not notice or ignore the enormous subconscious din. The schema of the hidden layer provides a conceptual model of a massive web of neuronal connections microscopically interwoven throughout the brain. Such neural networks are the brain's real power brokers, the influence peddlers and decision makers hard at work behind the closed doors of dark and white matter. How consciousness occurs remains an utter mystery, but conceptually, it must arise out of these hidden layers. The concept of neural networks also you don't need to go to the quantum scale. You don't need to go to the quantum realm. The concept of neural networks also helps explain when I lose you. It couldn't have been very long, but did you hear that you don't have to go to the quantum realm? We'll read it again. Yeah, fuck it. Let's, we don't even need to stop recording, bro. Could have sworn I could. Yeah. Am I recording right now? It's blue-green. I think I must be recording right now, right? The schema of the hidden layer. I'm sure I lost you after that, right? On the subconscious din. I'll just start there. Even given the amount of potential information incoming at any instant, we can focus on a single aspect of consciousness and either not notice or ignore the enormous subconscious din. The schema of the hidden layer provides a conceptual model of a massive web of neuronal connections microscopically interwoven throughout the brain. Such neural networks are the brain's real power brokers, the influence peddlers and decision makers hard at work behind the closed doors of dark and white matter. How consciousness occurs remains an utter mystery, but conceptually it must arise out of these hidden layers. You don't need to go to the quantum realm. The concept of neural networks also helps explain why established habits, beliefs, and judgments are so difficult to change. Imagine the gradual formation of a riverbed. The initial flow of water might be completely random. There are no preferred routes in the beginning. But once a creek has been formed, water is more likely to flow this newly created path of least resistance. As the water continues, the creek deepens, and a river develops. On your first visit to Amazon, you have no particular preference in mind. You randomly pick out a bestseller, an Elmore Leonard novel. The next time, must be his cousin or something. The next time you click on Amazon, you will be bombarded with recommendations for other crime novels. Perhaps you hadn't planned on buying another, but you're seduced by the blurbs and reviews. Eventually, your recommendations are a reflection of a chance initial purchase, like the beginning of a stream that mindlessly deepens itself. The brain is only human. It too relies on established ways. And as interneuronal connections increase, they become more difficult to overcome. A hitch in your golf swing, biting your nails, persisting with a faulty idea, not dumping your .com stocks in late 1999. Habits, whether mental or physical, are exasperating examples of the power of those microscopic linkages. At the most personal level, most of us glumly acknowledge that we could abandon many of our failed self improvement efforts if we could somehow painlessly alter these neural networks. Yet B.F. Skinner was roundly booed for pushing behavioral modification. If he'd had his way, we'd have been raised like veal. But he was not alone. The idea of somehow undoing the circuitry is not just the stuff of science fiction. It is a recurring theme in medicine. In 1939, Moniz, a Portuguese neurologist and Nobel laureate, observed, "It is necessary to alter these synapse adjustments and change the paths chosen by the impulses in their constant passage so as to modify corresponding ideas and force thoughts into different channels. By upsetting the existing adjustments and setting in motion other connections, I expect to be able to transform the psychic reactions and to thereby relieve the patients." Bro, he's absolutely right. What is the problem here? Alternatively, instead of changing the sitz time, you could change the conditions. Those are the two options, bro. In 1936, Dr. Moniz introduced a surgical. Not now we couldn't do it. Not in 1936 you couldn't do it. I see, it was crude. In 1936, Dr. Moniz introduced a surgical procedure, prefrontal leucotomy, primarily for the treatment of schizophrenia. The operation, later referred to as a frontal lobotomy, was designed to destroy connections between. All right, I know it sounds like I'm advocating for lobotomies, but I'm not. Was designed to destroy connections between the prefrontal region and other parts of the brain. I didn't know that he was a guy. Okay. In 1949, the Nobel Committee said of Moniz's work, "Frontal leucotomy, despite certain limitations of the operative method, must be considered one of the most important discoveries ever made in psychiatric therapy." And that is true. What is remarkable about Moniz was his prescience in predicting the power of neural networks combined with a profound naivete in believing that they could be surgically altered. If you want, yeah, you can't do it with nanotechnology. I bet we could do it. If you want to see how these patients turned out, watch George Romero's Night of the Living Dead or Milos Forman's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. In fairness to Moniz, at that time, medicine had little else to offer the severely psychiatrically disturbed. The era of modern psychopharmacology began with the introduction of the first phenothiazine, Thorazine, in 1954. But old ideas die hard. Okay, but also, or yeah, surgical is the problem. Okay, but also ideas die. But old ideas die hard. Perhaps because the way we conceptualize the practice of medicine is itself a pattern difficult to change. Hence the continuing surgical mentality of, if it seems diseased, cut it out. The head of I should make sure I'm recording now. I mean, the sound. Echo 26 Golf 2001. But old ideas die hard, perhaps because the way we conceptualize the practice of medicine is itself a pattern difficult to change. Hence the continuing surgical mentality of, if it seems diseased, cut it out. The head of stereotactic and functional neurosurgery at the Cleveland Clinic has recently suggested that a combination of neurosurgical techniques, implanted computer processors, and evolving molecular biological strategies might be able to replace entire networks that become affected by psychiatric and other neurological diseases. In this science fiction, is this science fiction, wishful thinking, utter madness, or a heartfelt and genuine attempt by neuroscientists struggling to mold these essentially infinite connections into a workable medical model? Networks aren't localized like a spot of rust on a fender. They aren't separable into their component parts any more than a cake can be reverse engineered into eggs, sugar, flour, water, and chocolate. These networks are the brain. Okay, but I just don't. I feel like yes, no, yes, because that network's not going to do that same thing like you keep trying to tell me. If this network is different, yeah, I don't know, but it's just like speeding up learning, just adjusting the. But it's like maybe we just can't fathom it, but I still feel like it would be. We're getting tired. What are we in? Chapter 6? Modularity and emergence. Two words my dad likes. I love modularity. I think there's some when I hear people use the word emergence, I think it tends to be people don't understand. Properties can be there are some cool emergent properties. No emergent phenomena. Let's see what Dr. Bertain says. Now I want to know. Chapter 6, Modularity and Emergence. Section, Organizing Complexity. Seeing each individual neuron as a simple on and off device is convenient yet profoundly deceiving. The final yes-no decision to fire or not to fire is influenced by complex control mechanisms ranging from the interactions of genes to moment shifts in hormone levels. Behave, Robert Sapolsky. Understanding how the mind works would require nothing less than a full understanding of these relationships at every instant and the ability to accurately predict the final output of such competing forces. All right, fine. Then I'm not going to do map its. That's off my plate. Thank you. I'm not mad. Once we leave the individual neuron, the scale of interaction becomes exponentially more complex. Fortunately, for the purposes of our discussion, we don't need to get bogged down in endless speculations and moment by moment updates of what is presently known about such mechanisms. To understand the origin of a thought, we can get by with the grossest of simplifications. Individual, mindless neurons join together to mysteriously create the mind. Individual, mindless. You know what? They're so mindless. There's such things of no mind that maybe we should even use an inanimate pronoun. We can call them its. And these are its that like take in input and then produce output. So and they're only triggered by certain input. So it'll be like if this, then this. Wait a minute. If you make an acronym, hear me out here. If you make an acronym out of if then, no, it's too close. IT, right? Because I was thinking like they're like they're just these inanimate objects, and then I was trying to think how can I work in the input output thing, but it's kind of already there because it's IT. Oh my gosh, IT, information technology. It's like how we are like these computer systems and how it's just these binary off on switches and connections and all that stuff. If I were a philosopher, if I were a sci philosopher, I would come up with a thing that I call it theory. And it would include a lot of these ideas. Can't believe nobody's thought of that yet. Fortunately, for the purpose of our discussion, to understand the origin of a thought, we can get by with the grossest of simplifications. Individual, mindless neurons join together to mysteriously create the mind. Which brings us to the interrelated concepts of modularity, hierarchical structure, and emergence. Section, modules. Perhaps the most intensively studied region of the brain, the visual system, provides us with an excellent generalization about how the brain converts lower level functions to higher level behaviors. The visual cortex is organized into clusters of cells that selectively respond to the various components of vision, from the recognition of discrete angles, lines, and edges, foreground and background, to the detection of motion and color. Such neurons only fire when presented with certain categories of stimuli, but not with others. For example, a cell might respond maximally to one angle of light, but less so for other angles of light, and not at all for yet others. A cell might respond to a particular shape, but not another. A cluster of these, I get it. I get how the computer on-off thing is too crude. No, I lost it, but I had this feeling of getting it, and I had an image. It was tied to something, I think. I had to do mushrooms to really get it, I think. Such neurons only fire when presented with certain categories of stimuli, but not with others. For example, some might respond maximally to one angle of light, but less so for other angles of light, and not at all for yet others. So to respond maximally would be bzz, 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 bzz. To respond less so would be bzz, bzz. Yeah, I mean pink-ish, or yeah, 35 degrees-ish, bruh. I mean, or low acute angle-ish, bruh. Um, a cell might respond to a particular shape, but not another. A cluster of these highly individualized neurons, specific to a single visual function, is referred to as a module. A cluster of its is a module. We don't have a word for that. We have a word for the whole sequence, the supit. A cluster of highly individualized neurons specific to a single visual function is referred to as a module. So it's like a team. Like they're all specific to kind of the same thing, or they all. Let's highlight that. Module. I didn't realize it had such a technical definition. Section: the hierarchical arrangement of sensory data. Your retina detects an orange and black fluttering. The information is sent to the primary visual cortex. Each category of module gathers. Oh, no, yeah, you're right. We're hot. We gotta open that door. Let's go outside. Yeah. I'm gonna be back in 2 seconds. Oh, still on the line. I'm so hungry, but don't have any appetite. Did you hear that? Okay, let's go. The hierarchical. Oh, I like it better this way, I think. No, I don't think I do. What do I know? One it said yes, one it said no. And that conflict was engaged with, even made into words. The hierarchical arrangement of sensory data. Your retina detects an orange and black fluttering. The information is sent to the primary visual cortex. Each category of module gathers its own particular data, such as the detection of vertical or horizontal motion, color, shape, and size. No single module can create a visual image. Rather, the output of each flows into higher order networks within the visual association areas, where it emerges with a host of inputs from non-visual circuitry. The remembrance of seeing a similar pattern hovering over a mountain lake, a trip to a natural science museum with your grandfather, the cover of a book on chaos theory, a scary scene from Silence of the Lambs. The sensory detection committee within the visual association hidden layer weights the inputs and casts its ballot. The output becomes the perception and recognition of a monarch butterfly hovering on your front porch. Modules process different aspects of vision, yet work as a team. We can't see pure motion, despite having a module for motion detection. We need to see an object or shape moving. Similarly, we can't see pure color in the absence of some form. Awareness of individual modules. Let's read that one more time. Modules process different aspects of vision, yet work as a team. We can't see pure motion, despite having a module for motion detection. We need to see an object or shape moving. Similarly, we can't see pure color in the absence of some form. Because if you're like me, you might have just imagined a color and be like, yeah, I can. But what do we say to us? Shut the fuck up. Awareness of individual modules occurs primarily when they fail to operate properly, leaving a hole in our fabric of perception. For example, a small stroke limited to the area of the occipital cortex that controls movement detection can cause a sudden inability to see images in motion. One such patient reported seeing a stalled car on the road some distance away, then while continuing to observe the car, it suddenly was looming directly in front of her. Unable to detect motion, she saw only a succession of discontinuous still shots of the car. When pouring a cup of tea, she saw a frozen arc of tea rather than flowing water. But you can't like study it, right? Because it's not like, oh, could you study the image? Does it like, all right, well, this is the last information? No, I don't think so. I don't think you could like study the still as you're like looking. I think that you would say, I don't know, it's not blurry, but I can't like study it. I don't know, almost like when you're talking about a dream or something. Um, Once, only when she saw a puddle appear on the floor did she realize that the cup had overflowed. She was neither able to see the car approaching nor the cup filling up. But working backwards from such case histories, neurologists have been able to identify at least 30 discrete modules that generate the visual image, although it is likely that we will uncover others. Modules are the building blocks of perception, and we can just use modules as in honor of Father who told us the mind is modular. Can't share any of our work with him because he doesn't believe me about any of it, except he does because it is what he taught me. But it violates his feeling of knowing, his feeling of consciousness, his feeling of knowing that feeling of consciousness. And it doesn't matter what other stuff, facts, logic he may know. Nothing's going to trump that feeling of consciousness and feeling of being right about it. And out of all the goofy things I inherited, that was not one of them, I don't think. But maybe I'm wrong. All right, modules are the building blocks of perception, but are not normally individually detectable. An aside, be thankful that we do not normally experience the separate effect of each module that contributes to a visual image. Being constantly aware of the scaffolding of perception would be frustrating and confusing. The incoming sensory information would be as unnecessary as labeling each item we see or touch. Imagine a world in which you had to eat the recipes along with the meal. Mm-hmm. Okay, right. Not the same as the menu meal thing that Niebauer was talking about. The stripped down model of brain hierarchy is that the individual neurons, which contain no imagery and operate outside of awareness, flow into progressively higher order networks until a picture emerges. In AI models, which are extraordinarily simple in relationship to the most primitive animal brain, the 2008. I don't know. I don't think that's not true anymore. The conversion of lower level information into the final image is accomplished via a series of mathematical calculations within the hidden layer of the neural networks. The precise mechanisms remain a profound mystery, and the key to understanding how consciousness arises out of mindless neurons to give this extraordinary process. The precise mechanisms remain a profound mystery, and the key to understanding how consciousness arises out of mindless neurons. To give this extraordinary process a common sense explanation, scientists have provided us with the self-defining yet intuitively appealing theory of emergence. Intuitively appealing. And maybe the people who are like, oh, emergent phenomena, they don't really get emergence. Let's see whether emergence is really just about sort of properties, labels. Yeah. What was I going to say? To get this extraordinary process common sense explanation, scientists have provided us with the self-defining yet intuitively appealing theory of emergence. Key to understanding how consciousness arises out of mindless neurons. The conversion of lower level information to the final image in AI models. Don't know. Section Emergence. A classical example of emergence is how termites, with their tiny brains, are able to construct huge mounds up to 25 feet in height. No termite has a clue how or why to build a mound. Its brain isn't large enough to carry the information. There are no termite engineers, architects, or critics, or judges, or pilots. All termites are low-level laborers operating without blueprints or even a mind's eye notion of a termite mound. Yet the mound is built. Somehow the interaction of lower-level capabilities, all the its, produces a higher-level activity. There you go. Boom. That's it. That's it right there. He did it. Okay, good. Suppose he had said somehow the interaction of lower-level capabilities produces a higher-level capability. That would be an emergent capability or emergent phenomena. And we would say, boo. But no, somehow am I tripping? Somehow the interaction of lower level capabilities produces a higher level activity. I don't think I'm tripping. The same process applies to the human brain. Each neuron is like a termite. It cannot contain a complete memory or hold an intelligent discussion. There are no super neurons, nor is there a master plan contained within each neuron. Each neuron's DNA provides general instructions for how a cell operates and relates with other cells. It does not provide instructions for logic, reason, or poetry. And yet out of this mass of cells comes Shakespeare, Newton. Holy shit. How is that even possible? Shakespeare, Newton, and Jerez. But because this was written the year I graduated high school, so I get that it was obvious what I was going to be contributing, but I didn't come up with Eris until like 2016. That's amazing. Consciousness, intentionality, purpose, and meaning all emerge from the interconnections between billions of neurons that do not contain these elements. Intentionality, yes. Purpose, yes. Meaning, yes. Desire, yes. Free will, no. Consciousness, no. That was me talking. So, rereading what he said: consciousness, intentionality, purpose, and meaning all emerge from the interconnections between billions of neurons that do not contain these elements. Termites are to termite mounds as single neurons are to the mind. Primary modules provide the bricks and mortar. The secondary association areas build the house. And yet more complex interactions are necessary to call this building home. Modularity. What? What do you mean? Primary modules provide the bricks and mortar. Secondary association areas build the house. And yet more complex interactions are necessary to call this building home. Yeah, it's about those two its. It's about more engagement, the system to it. Yeah. So you've got the one its, primary modules. That's the brick and mortar. That's the stuff that deals with the in livery. It's the stuff that's in the anti-livery for the secondary association areas, which is starting to put some shit together. And some, this it and this it have voted, and you got your committee member. If we scale up a little bit, and then you have even more at the end of the two it spectrum, or the end of the one it two it spectrum. You got super complex interactions that make it home. Okay. Modularity, when combined with a schematic hierarchical arrangement of increasingly complex layers of neural networks and the concept of emergence, serves as an excellent working model for how the brain builds up complex perceptions, thoughts, and behavior. Harvard psychology professor Steven Pinker has even gone so far as to suggest that we use the term modules interchangeably with mental organs to emphasize that the brain is composed of many functionally specialized mechanisms that collectively create the mind. Wonderful. I think my dad just has dementia because he should know this stuff. He does. I got to do a video with him. No, we can't. We'll get upset. He'll be like, "You're trying to embarrass me." Okay, no, I see, because I'm referring to as dementia, but it's because it's also I have faith that, and also no, it's not about embarrassing him. Look, these authors, when they talk about their case studies, they're not going to say they're embarrassing. It's all about trying to embarrass. That's just a mallet. No, it's extremely fucking interesting how someone could be so atheist and so on, talk about a modular mind, and then need to go to the quantum realm for consciousness. It's fascinating. You're contributing to science. And then if you don't, if it clicks somehow, if you go, no, you're right, yeah, no, it's modules, and okay, let me hear more about this it theory. I've got somebody I can talk to about it theory. It's a win-win. Either we learn about it theory, or I have someone to talk to about it theory. It's a win fucking win. Of course, this isn't literally true. The brain is a single organ, but it does help us conceptualize how aspects of complex behaviors can be broken down into more manageable bits. The bad news, and a huge caveat when applying the idea of modularity to behavior, is that excessive reductionism, or a funny definition of behavior, can lead to grand nonsense. Anyone familiar with the biographies of Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Gates realizes that acts of charity cannot be easily attributed to precise motivations and urges or a gene for altruism. One man's compassion is another's tax deduction. A quick word about module localization. When neurologists talk of visual modules, they are referring to columns of adjacent cells within the visual cortex that perform the various tasks necessary to create a visual image. These modules are anatomically discrete, confined to a small region of the brain, and can be identified with standard neurophysiological studies such as microelectrode intracellular recordings. Modules for behavior aren't well localized. That's okay. They don't have to be in a small region. We never imagined that they were. They represent widely distributed aspects of a common function. Steven Pinker's wonderfully disgusting description bears repeating. The word module brings to mind detachable, snap-in components. All right, no. And that is misleading. Mental modules are not likely to be visible to the naked eye. A mental module probably looks more like roadkill, sprawling messily over the bulges and crevices of the brain. Or it may be broken into regions that are interconnected by fibers that make the regions act as a unit. Consider the myriad components involved in the acquisition of language, ranging from the visual recognition of symbols and auditory processing of spoken sounds, phonemes, to the sorting out of nuance and implied irony. A racial epithet can be an accusation or a term of endearment, depending upon circumstance, facial expression, body language, and intonation. Comedian George Carlin has made a career out of forcing us to hear politically loaded words from unanticipated angles. In the interpretation of a single word, large areas of widely separated but interconnected cortex function as a behavioral unit, hence the applicability of the term module. Any classification of widespread, non-discrete modularity at this level requires a leap of faith. That these anatomically separate areas of brain contributing to behavior are actually genetically linked in the same way that a Tinker Toys components are part of a grand toy design. In time, it is likely that some behavioral traits will meet such criteria. Others will be delegated to the trash heap of outdated psychology. Yeah, and with the map, we're speculating, and that's kind of the next fun chapter, is that we're going to kind of try to really be able to do research ourselves, actually. I don't know exactly how, but somehow guessing what a map it might look like, and then looking at like brain scans. I have no idea. I don't know. I need your help. The general concept. Nevertheless, some version of modularity is essential to any unraveling of the biology of behavior. Whether talking about genes for risk-taking, perfect pitch, or mathematical ability, or the adaptive value of compassion, deceit, or Machiavellian cunning, evolutionary biologists take as their starting point the assumption that certain biological attributes are integral to the expression of behavioral traits. If evolution is responsible, genetic transmission is presumed. The general concept of modularity is a powerful tool for generalizing how the brain functions, including the formation of our thoughts. The feeling of knowing is universal, most likely originates within a localized region of the brain. The feeling of knowing is universal, most likely originates within a localized region of the brain, can be spontaneously activated via direct stimulation or chemical manipulation, yet cannot be triggered by conscious effort. These arguments for its inclusion as a primary brain module are more compelling than those postulated for deceit, compassion, forgiveness, altruism, or Machiavellian cunning. One can stimulate the brain and produce a feeling of knowing. One cannot stimulate the brain and create a politician. What a predicament. The idea of a thought being created by more specialized modules, some operating outside of our control and awareness, seems both intuitively obvious and antithetical to how we experience our thoughts. I'm not talking about the difference between conscious and unconscious cognition, but I'm referring to how we build a thought from scratch. At stake is the concept of a rational mind. How we build a thought from scratch, we don't. And when he shows us that, we're going to realize, oh, it's not a rational mind. That's what I'm expecting. If I forget to check back in on that, tell me if I was wrong. To begin this exploration, we should take a page from the neurologist's approach to brain function and look for conditions in which an inappropriate activation of a module affects thought in unanticipated and unintentional ways. One of the most fascinating and insightful is the phenomenon of synesthesia. Section, synesthesia. First described in 1880 by Francis Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin, synesthesia is commonly thought to represent an involuntary commingling of two normally unrelated sensory modalities, such as sight and sound. Those affected experience two separate sensations as a single unit. They cannot willfully suppress the secondary sensory input. A synesthete might hear colors, taste shapes, and describe the color, shape, and flavor of someone's voice or music. According to those neurologists who have spent considerable time interviewing synesthetes, these perceptions are experienced as real, as opposed to mere illusion, hallucination, or being seen in the mind's eye. Right, okay. Here are two typical descriptions. A 47-year-old psychologist. New Orleans type jazz hits me all over like heavy, sharp raindrops. The sound of guitars always feels like someone is blowing on my ankles. Patricia Duffy, a journalist and co-founder of the American Synesthesia Association. I can't remember his name, but I know it's purple. Vladimir Nabokov on the alphabet. The long A of the English alphabet has for me the tint of weathered wood, but a French A evokes polished ebony. This black group also includes polished ebony. This black group also includes hard G, vulcanized rubber, and R, a sooty rag being ripped. Oatmeal and noodle limp 1, or L, and the ivory-backed hand mirror of O take care of the white. Passing on to the blue group, there's Steely X, under Thundercloud Z, and Huckleberry Hotel. Since a subtle interaction exists between sound and shape, I see Quebec as browner than Kilo, while Sierra is not the light blue of Charlie, but a curious mixture of azure and mother of pearl. Arthur Rimbaud, Vasily Kandinsky, Vladimir Nabokov, David Hockney, and Alexander Scriabin are just a few of the great artists who have had this eerie ability, if ability is the proper word. To see how these involuntary sensations shape both behavior and thought, here's David Hockney's description of creating a set design for the Metropolitan Opera. I listen to the Ravel music, and there's a tree in one part of it, and there's music that accompanies the tree. When I listened to that music, the tree just painted itself. For Hockney, the musical sound of a segment of Ravel triggered his brain to see a tree. Hockney also has spoken of hearing the colors that he has painted. Alexander Scriabin, the Russian composer and pianist, was one of the first synesthetes to thoroughly catalog his color musical note associations. C sharp was violet, and E was pearly white and the shimmer of moonlight. Neurologist V.S. Ramachandran offers some compelling speculations as to how synesthesia might occur. Perhaps a mutation causes connections to emerge between brain areas that are usually segregated. Or maybe the mutation leads to defective pruning of pre-existing connections between areas that are normally connected only sparsely. Though Ramachandran initially thought in terms of physical cross-wiring, he now believes that the same effect could also occur with neurochemical imbalances between regions. Architecture and chemistry. For instance, no. Yes, neighboring brain regions often inhibit one another's activity, this is bad, which serves to minimize crosstalk. For instance, neighboring brain regions often inhibit one another's activity, which serves to minimize crosstalk. A chemical imbalance that reduces such inhibition, for example, by blocking the action of an inhibitory neurotransmitter or failing to produce an inhibitor, would also cause activity in one area to elicit activity in a neighbor. Such cross-activation could, in theory, also work between widely separated areas, which would account for some of the less common forms of synesthesia. I'm sorry, one moment. It's so hot. What's frustrating is, maybe theory isn't like the biggest. I mean, no, it is important. It's giving words to a lot of important things, but it's not necessarily a profound discovery. It's maybe a profound framework, a profound bundle of certain ideas. I use bundle, reference to bundle theory, which wasn't unlike it theory. Um, and it's just I want, but it's stuff that that's information that's been available, and it has some pretty fundamental implications. And I'm a human who doesn't get a lot of opportunity to talk about some of those implications with someone, exchange with someone about them. Um, and so I guess my dad thought I was like, I'm presenting a theory as though it's something based on new experiments. No, it's a theory based on experiments that are just hard for us to interpret, or hard for us to, it's not everybody that's saying this stuff like Dr. Bertain, like Niebauer, like um, Mazrin Banaji, Ramachandran, Francis Crick. So it's based on their research. And it's not about the product. It's not about the theory. When I'm having a conversation with someone, sometimes it's about trying to get them caught up with this stuff so that we can talk about the implications, so we can brainstorm, so we can wonder, but wonder from a buzz, a basis, a foundation that's more up to date. So I'm not, maybe we can say that sometimes I'm not making like a declaration. I'm trying to give us the tools to talk about some really important shit that we figured out. That's all. So those tools to talk about the things we figured out aren't based on research, but they are. Yeah, we haven't tested. Do these tools work to help us talk about these things? Don't know. I think it's work. Sometimes the only word that is right, feels right, is a word from my vocabulary. But in order to figure that out, I would need to have those conversations. I don't have anyone that I can speak in the vocabulary of it theory with, see whether it unlocks some useful reframing. So anyway, just more father-son issues. For instance, I'll read this quote again from Ramachandran. For instance, neighboring brain regions often inhibit one another's activity, which serves to minimize crosstalk, a chemical imbalance that reduced such inhibition. For example, I said that because I said I'd really love to, share some of these ideas with you. He said, are they based on research? The answer is yes, and also I guess no, but like the things that I'm saying that are true is based on people's research. The things that I'm inventing is not based on research. It's a method to talk about the results of that research. For instance, neighboring brain regions often inhibit one another's activity, which serves to minimize crosstalk. A chemical imbalance that reduces touch inhibition, for example, by blocking the action of an inhibitory neurotransmitter or failing to produce an inhibitor, would also cause activity in one area to elicit activity in a neighbor. Such cross-activation could, in theory, also occur between widely separated areas, which would account for some of the less common forms of synesthesia. Synesthesia commonly runs in families. Most neurologists accept a genetic component. A journal entry from Carol S., a New York artist. I was sitting with my family around the dinner table, and I said, the number 5 is yellow. At that time in my life, I was having trouble deciding whether the number 2 is green and the number 6 blue, or just the other way around. And I said to my father, is number 2 green? No, I skipped lines. Here's her journal entry. I was sitting with my family around the dinner table, and I said, the number 5 is yellow. She doesn't sound like a synesthete. She sounds like, lots of people have associations with colors. But if you're not living it, if you can't figure it out, then you're not a synesthete, right? Whatever. Synesthesia commonly runs in families. Most neurologists accept a genetic component. A journal entry from Carol S., a New York artist. I was sitting with my family around the dinner table, and I said, the number 5 is yellow. There was a pause, and my father said, no, it's yellow ochre. At that time in my life, I was having trouble deciding whether the number 2 is green and the number 6 blue, or just the other way around. And I said to my father, is the number 2 green? And he said, yes, definitely, it's green. Bro, this sounds like some magnets on their fridge, bro. An interesting sidebar, members of a family do not necessarily experience the same colors or even the same types of synesthesia. The same presumed gene or genes can produce similar or dissimilar experiences. Yet another argument for distinguishing between genes associated with a particular behavior and the actual manifestation of the behavior. Section: Private Islands. Synesthete Patricia Duffy elegantly summarizes how these differences in perception are at the heart of different worldviews. Okay, and I would say different interpretations, not just perceptions. In life, so much depends on the question, do you see what I see? That most basic of queries binds human beings socially. Having one's perceptions go uncorroborated can make one feel particularly alone in the world, marooned on my own private island of navy blue seas, navy blue Charlies, dark brown deltas, sparkling green sevens, and wine-colored victories. Whiskey, Victor, and wine-colored victors. What else did I see differently from the rest of the world? I wondered. What did the rest of the world see that I didn't? It occurred to me that maybe every person in the world had some little oddity of perception they weren't aware of that put them on a private island, mysteriously separated from others. I suddenly had the dizzying feeling that there might be as many of these private islands as there were people in the world. Synesthesia offers a startling insight. Lower level brain modules can profoundly affect not only our ordinary sensory perceptions, but also how we experience abstract symbols such as letters and numbers. If thought is the manipulation of words and symbols, we need to consider whether our very building blocks of thought might also be subject to involuntary, even genetic influences that make each of us private islands of perception and thinking, which I guess I would say is like the interpretation, the interpretive mechanisms. Bro, we're just blowing through this. How awesome is this? I guess that was a fake smile. I was just looking at it. Anyway, chapter 7. When does a thought begin? Section: Timing, or the chicken and the newly hatched idea. You mull over an idea. You contemplate, ruminate, meditate, and sleep on it. You gradually are convinced and say to yourself, yes, that's right. This apparent cause and effect temporal sequence, first the thought, then the assessment of the thought, and then the feeling of correctness, is what gives the feeling of knowing its authority. Any other sequence wouldn't make sense and would strip the feeling of knowing of any practical value. It only works if it works. But experience tells us that the feeling of knowing has a variable temporal relationship to conscious reasoning. His quotes. Possible timing sequences could include the following examples. In scenario A, we experience a feeling of knowing without any accompanying thought, as is seen with mystical experiences in brain simulation studies. Any interpretation or explanation of this feeling is an agit, occurs after the experience. A common contemporary example is a profound spiritual sense of oneness, followed by the interpretation that this moment represented a divine revelation. Absolutely. These hippie fucks will talk about, I was going to say folks, I think. We'll talk about the sense of oneness, and they peered in and they realized that everything was connected. They realized everyone was connected, and they felt a sense of oneness. But no, and sometimes they'll tell you the story correctly. They'll say, I felt this incredibly sense of connectedness, of oneness, and I realized that we're all connected. And it's like, hello. A common contemporary example is a profound spiritual sense of oneness, followed by the interpretation that this moment represented a divine revelation. That's scenario A. In scenario B, a series of unconscious associations is infused with a sense of correctness. The thought and the feeling of correctness reach consciousness as a unit and are experienced together as an insight or an aha moment. Many great scientists have described their breakthroughs as brainstorms, where it just popped into my head, rather than as a product of methodical deliberation. I've said in interviews, I don't deliberate. If you don't mind me grouping myself with the great scientists, or if we can say great thinkers, I don't deliberate. Things happen. Things happen. Sometimes I hear it when you're hearing it. Sometimes I have a sense of familiarity with what's coming out, like right now, but I'm still really, I think, hearing it when you're hearing it. No, there was part of that I had experienced before saying it. Or maybe not. They talk of preparation, laying the groundwork, but the actual insight, so doing the reading, observing, journaling about the observation, letting the questions come out and writing them down. But the actual insight feels like a bolt from the blue. I don't know about a bolt from the blue. For me, it kind of creeps up. Yeah, kind of creeps up. Start having this feeling of knowing. But then again, what do we know? What do I know? Maybe that thing that happens is complete bullshit. But because I had this feeling of knowing, then whatever came out, I was like, there it is. Especially if the feeling of knowing comes in full force then. This is the unsettling thing about what we've discovered. Srinivasa Ramanujan, the famous Indian mathematician, once said that he would simply know that a complex result in number theory was true, and that it was only a matter of later proving it. The difference between you and Ramanujan is that he later proved it, right? So all you intuitive shits who are like, oh yeah, sometimes you just know. Are you then doing the work and finding out that it's true and like confirming it like mathematically and like you're like a famous, whatever? If not, that feeling of knowing might not be as just don't let that one sentence be like, yes, that's right, my intuition knows. It is highly unlikely that difficult mathematical theorems can appear without any prior contemplation and preparation, but it is easy to accept that an insight occurs as the result of a new association arising out of the reworking of unresolved prior ruminations, half-formed queries, or vague hunches. Yeah, no, my creeping feeling of knowing there's a focus. It keeps being about a certain thing. Like for instance, it only works when it works. That's something I've been dancing around for a while, and now I'm kind of categorizing as a thought or as a concept. These associations begin with a hidden layer, and once judged to be correct, are then passed on into consciousness. We experience the thought and the feeling of its correctness simultaneously as a eureka or a moment of truth. In scenario C, an idea is encountered for the first time. It is objectively determined to be correct, and then one knows the answer is correct. For example, you know you have found your friend's house when your friend answers the doorbell, or you dial a telephone number and reach the intended party. With scenario C, the feeling of the correctness of a thought clearly follows conscious assessment and testing. To have unconditional trust that a feeling of knowing represents a justifiable conclusion, we need to know which of these three scenarios has actually occurred. Timing is everything. But what if the brain contains mechanisms that rearrange the perception of a sequence of events? When I tell you I understand this stuff, I'm not saying that I have divine revelation, I understand everything, but important enough for you to shut the fuck up and listen. Let me take a second. That didn't take too long, did it? Oh shit. Echo 26 Golf. Echo 26 Golf 2051. I'm back. Not what was I gonna say? Not chill. I haven't not anymore chill, but alright, here I am, let's go. Timing is everything. But what if the brain contains mechanisms that rearrange the perception of a sequence of events? What if our brain can trick us into trick itself, into believing that event X follows event Y, even though it actually precedes it? He's gonna talk about David Eagleman because he should bring him. I should have brought him up with synesthesia. No, maybe this was before. Okay. It sounds like a preposterous proposition, but what if this rearrangement is necessary to overcome yet other physiological barriers to the proper perception of a sequence of events? What if our brains can trick us themselves into believing that event X follows event Y, even though it actually precedes it? Sounds like a preposterous proposition, but what if this rearrangement is necessary to overcome yet other physiological barriers to the proper perception of a sequence of events? Optical illusions, once explained, feel like insights into how our brain assembles what we refer to as reality. But when was the last time you saw time presented as an optical illusion? The question was, when was the last time you saw time presented as an optical illusion? Then we've got here some text. Okay, so the bold text says, can we cuddle? The bold text says, subjective backward projection of time. The paragraph says, Sandy Koufax's fastball was so fast, some batters would start to swing as he was on his way to the mound. Quote, that's a quote by Jim Murray. Jay Blow sits in his overheated and underdecorated Pittsburgh hotel room deep in a batting slump. His team is in last place. He's 1,000 miles from home, and a handful of strikeouts from being sent down to a bottom-of-the-barrel farm club. The morning of the game, he gets a call from his wife asking if there will be a year-end bonus. Both daughters need orthodonture and ballet lessons. His 6-year-old son comes on and says that he misses his father, then says in a tiny voice that could break a stone's heart, "Please hit a home run for me." He hangs up and watches a Giants game. Barry Bonds hits 3 for 3, including a double and a home run. Blow opens his wallet and pulls out some crumpled and yellowed scraps of paper, newspaper clippings of quotes by Bonds, Ted Williams, and Stan Musial, 3 of the greatest hitters in the history of baseball. Bonds told how do you lock it? What about locking it or something? Bonds told broadcaster and former Cy Kai Young Award winner Rick Sutcliffe that he had reduced the strike zone to a tiny hitting area, and that's all he looked at. It's about the size of a quarter, said Bonds. In 1986, Ted Williams said, Until I got to 2 strikes, I looked for one pitch in one area about the size of a silver dollar. Stan Musial told the rookie, if I want to hit a grounder, I hit the top third of the ball. If I want to hit a line drive, I hit the middle third. If I want to hit a fly ball, I hit the bottom third. How do they do it? Blow asked himself. These days, I can barely see the ball leaving the pitcher's hand. Who's talking right now? Okay. How do they do it? Blow asks himself. These days, this is, I think, Dr. Bertain talking. These days, I can barely see the ball leaving the pitcher's hand. At the park, the manager is a combination of reassurance and subtle threat. Just get some wood on the ball. No swinging for the fence. And don't worry, maybe you can get back your confidence to Springfield, the AAA farm club. Think of all the inputs, conscious and unconscious, swirling through Blow's head as he steps up to the plate. His father is scowling, doubtful, disappointed. His mother is rolling and unrolling the hem of her skirt, softly praying. His high school coach is calling his name. It is the first time that he will be sitting in the starting lineup, and he is both cocky and scared. The hidden layer has its work cut out for it. The assignment is no less than weighting childhood slights, long-forgotten failures, prior unexpected triumphs, parental attitudes, and a host of other variables huge enough to sink the psychoanalytic Titanic. Do as the manager says, Blow concludes. You can always explain to your son that winning is more important than personal statistics. Just connect with the ball. Take a nice, easy swing. So that was not Dr. Burton earlier talking. He was talking as Blow. Take a nice, easy swing. Blow plants his feet and gets ready. Here's the windup and the pitch, a medium speed, no softball, big as a harvest moon, virtually floating toward the plate, Blow thinks. This is not, I hate. And was this easier then? Here we go. Medium speed, no stuff ball, big as a harvest moon, virtually floating toward the plate, Blow thinks, judging from the pitcher's hand at the moment of release. The subcortical motor centers start to salivate. No way that they're going to let this one go. And Blow, fully intent upon just meeting the ball, swings with everything he's got. He hits a towering home run to left field. The team wins 1-0. Blow is the héros du jour. He's the hero du jour. After the game, the coach asks Blow why he ignored his instructions. Blow says with complete cortical honesty, I don't know. Something must have come over me. Great. Yeah, sort of. Professional baseball pitchers throw with, yes. Professional baseball pitchers throw with velocities in the range of 80 to 100 miles per hour. Elapsed time from the moment of release to the ball crossing home plate ranges from approximately 0.380 to 0.460 milliseconds. So 0.00380 seconds. Minimum reaction time from the instant the image of the ball's release reaches the retina to the initiation of the swing is approximately 200 milliseconds. Whoa. Wait, elapsed time from the moment of the release to the ball crossing home plate ranges from approximately less than 1 so it's less than 1 millisecond. The minimum reaction time is approximately 200 milliseconds. The swing takes another 160 to 190 milliseconds. Are these decimals correct? No way. No way a ball's traveling that fast. You can't reach home plate in less than a millisecond. No. Those decimals shouldn't be there. No, yeah. No. Those decimals shouldn't be there. Okay, let's do that again. Professional baseball players, this how stuff works says That means the ball covers the distance between the mound and home plate in 0.439 seconds, or 439 milliseconds. So let's read that again. We're going to take out the decimal point, or put it at the end. Okay, professional baseball pitchers throw with velocities in the range of 80 to 100 miles per hour. Elapsed time from the moment of release to the ball crossing home plate ranges from approximately 380 to 460 milliseconds. Minimum reaction time from the instant the image of the ball's release reaches the retina to the initiation of the swing is approximately 200 milliseconds. The swing takes another 160 to 190 milliseconds. So we're at 390, and the ball will be about 390 so far. The combination of reaction and swing time approximately equals the time it takes for a fastball to travel from the pitcher's mound to home plate. To get an appreciation for the magnitude of the problem, consider that a fastball will travel about 9 feet before your retina transmits and your brain processes the initial notification of the ball leaving the pitcher's hand. It's already gone 9 feet. Full perception of the pitch takes considerably longer. The delay in processing means that when the ball appears to be at a certain position, it is no longer at that position. To see it where it will be, the brain must integrate the speed of motion over time, estimate the degree of position shift, and combine this with the appearance of the object as seen at the present time. Pretty amazing. A micro version of precognition, only on a probabilistic level. The now that the batter experiences when he initiates his swing is virtual, generated by complicated subliminal computations. Once the ball is in flight, it is too late for detailed deliberation. The batter sees the release and the beginning of its path and then goes on automatic pilot. Sounds suspiciously like an inner machine at the helm, some robotic neuronal clumps that are responsible for a hitter like Babe Ruth or Barry Bonds. Yet we all know that a hitter's skill, beyond mere athleticism, is dependent upon prior practice and extensive study of the game. Great hitters keep extensive notes on the tendencies of opposing pitchers, including what type of pitch and where it will be thrown in various conditions. A 3-0 pitch with the bases loaded is more likely to be down the middle than an 0-2 pitch with the bases empty. The combination of circumstances is infinite, yet each hitter develops a probabilistic profile of the speed, trajectory, and location of the next pitch. It is in this realm that great players have a greater accuracy than novice players. The act of hitting the ball involves two fundamentally different strategies inextricably linked together. Conscious analysis prior to the event and reliance upon nearly instantaneous subconscious calculations at the onset of the event. They're not different systems, bro. I think it's just a different event. Yeah. The cortex sets out general guidelines for when to swing and where, then hands the controls over to quicker subcortical mechanisms. There we go. Say it like that. A simplified schema provided by a computer scientist engineer after extensive study of the physics of a pitch. We divide the pitch into thirds. During the first third, the batter gathers sensory data. During the middle third, he does computations, predicting where and when the ball will collide with his bat. During the last third, he is swinging. During the swing, he could close his eyes and would not make any difference. He can't alter the swing. The most he can do is check the swing. These studies have been duplicated with a variety of other sports, from ping pong to squash and cricket. Can you imagine a boxing match in which a fighter waits until he has fully seen and analyzed a punch before deciding what to do? The survival benefits of immediate action are self-evident. In conclusion, the batter is swinging at previously determined probabilities, not a closely observed ball. A fabulous hitter such as Barry Bonds is better at fine-tuning his swing in mid-arc than your average batter, but this does not result from conscious perception, deliberation, and then a decision. There simply isn't enough time. And what he seems to be talking about consciousness as sort of as language and the experiencing self, having a feeling of knowing with each element, and that takes time. Those are all processes, automatic processes that I listed that constitute conscious awareness, I think, maybe. And those are much slower processes than anything that can be done in half a centisecond. No, in half a second. In half a second. Yet Bonds, Williams, and Musio swear that they can engage their swing to within a baseball diameter target or less. A truly extraordinary feat when even the most advanced physics applied to the ball's early flight path cannot make such a precise prediction. So, are the world's greatest hitters really wishful thinkers? I hit the ball, therefore I saw it as it approached the plate. How can we balance off what the players believe that they saw with what science tells us is physiologically possible? Section, now you see it, now you don't. Now is in quotes. When we look out at the universe, it is easy to understand that the light from the sun takes 9 minutes to reach the earth. Oh yeah, it's 8:20, 8:30, 8. Oh, but he. Okay, whatever. 8. What is it? You don't mind, do you? No, not how much sunlight do we need? 8.3 minutes. So 8:20 something. 8 minutes and 20 seconds. Which was one of the 5 things I said. When we look out at the universe, it is easy to understand that the light from the sun takes 9 minutes to reach the earth, and that we are looking at a 9-minute-old event. Ditto for the light years for light to reach us from a distant galaxy. We have no difficulty living within a non-simultaneous universe, with both present and past being represented as now on our retinas. No difficulty? I'm not sure that's the case. The distances are simply too great to make a difference in our daily lives. But what about a rapidly approaching baseball? Hitting coaches stress, keeping your eye on the ball. Some say that you can see the ball to within a few feet of the plate. Others believe you can see the ball strike the bat. No matter. What is peculiar is that such images would not reach consciousness until after the swing has been made and the ball is already on its way out of the park or in the catcher's mitt. If the brain did not somehow compensate and project the image of the approaching baseball backward in time, you would see the ball approach the plate after you had already hit it. Well, yeah, of course, right? Yeah. Okay. What is peculiar is that such images would not reach consciousness until after the swing has been made and the ball is already on its way out of the park in the catcher's mitt. So by the time you're consciously processing that image, the ball's already going to be over there. What an experience that would be. Oh, fuck, it's all the way out there. I was just looking at it right here. If the brain did not somehow compensate and project the image of the approaching baseball backward in time, you would see the ball approach the plate after you had already hit it. Yeah. Okay, I don't have anything else to say about that. This aberration in the fabric of perceived time has been hotly argued as representing everything from evidence for non-causality to intention preceding awareness. Oh. This aberration in the fabric of perceived time has been hotly argued as representing everything from evidence for non-causality to intention preceding awareness. But the explanation needn't be deeply philosophical. This coordination of inputs is an everyday occurrence. If you bump into a door, the sensory inputs from your nose reach the brain sooner than those from your big toe, yet you perceive hitting the door with your entire body all at once. The brain adjusts for these time lags, when some mechanisms in the brain do. When I tap my foot, the motor movements are felt to be synchronous with my foot striking the ground. The length of time that it takes the sensation of my foot hitting the ground to reach the brain and be processed is not apparent. Without such adjustments, the varying delay between sensory inputs would create a kaleidoscope sense of time, a present that is spread out over time, a thick present, as opposed to an instantaneous now. Section, color phi. Phi, like Greek phi. If you want to see subjective backward projection in time, try a simple experiment. When lights in close proximity are briefly lit in rapid succession, we will see a single light moving from point A to point B, the basis of apparent movement in old-fashioned sign marquees. The brain interprets these two flashes of light as though the light is moving between the 2 points. Now color the lights. Make point A red and point B green. As we see the light move from point A to point B, it will abruptly shift from red to green approximately at the midway point between the 2 lights. So we're going to actually see the switch happen. We're going to perceive the switch as happening right between the 2 lights, because it's like the interpreters are like, well, yeah, one is going to switch hard, probably in the middle, right? So let's perceive that. In other words, we will see the green light flash prior to it actually being turned on. Oh, no, I didn't understand. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Now color the lights. Make point A red and point B green. As we see the light move from point A to point B, it will abruptly shift from red to green, approximately at the midpoint between the 2 lights. In other words, we will see the green light flash prior to it actually being turned on. So you do it when lights in close proximity are briefly lit in rapid succession. We'll see a single light moving from point A to point B. Let's color them. It will abruptly shift from red to green approximately at the midpoint between the 2 lights. In other words, we will see the green light flash prior to it actually being turned on. Within the interval provided by retinal cortical transmission and processing by a mechanism still unknown, the brain has shoved the flashing green image backward in time. We experience it sooner. Did you understand that? As we see the light move from point A to point B, it will abruptly shift from red to green, approximately the midpoint between the 2 lights. I don't understand. Are you like flashing them at the same time? In other words, we will see the green light flash prior to it actually being turned on. Alright, we should finish this chapter. It's not much left, but I don't know what to do about that right now. I don't understand that. Okay, let's try to work through it somehow. Let's just let the its put them out loud. If the words come out, then other its can engage, and maybe we'll figure it out. Don't feel good. Okay. So alright. Okay. I think I got it. So I think I had it. So what? How many events are there? We see that we perceive a single green point that moves. There's a sudden change. That's the second event, and now it arrives in its final place. There's 3 events because there's 3 positions. There's where the lights actually are, A and C. Okay, A and B, and then there's the midpoint, 8.5. So that's 3 events. That's 3 perceived events. I don't get it, bro. By taking advantage of the window of time required for processing incoming sensory data before outputting it as perception, discordant brain time and external time are realigned to allow for perception to create a seamless world of now. It has been estimated But the brain routinely can smooth out the discrepancies by backward projection of the second image by as much as 120 milliseconds. According to this bizarre but necessary neurophysiology, being in the moment is a virtual recipe that steals from both the recent past and the immediate future. To further complicate the problem of the timing of perception, consider how different the approaching baseball looks to the batter and to you, an observer sitting behind home plate. The pitcher fires three successive 95 miles per hour blazers. The batter whiffs the first and fouls off the next two. He prepares himself for another smoker. Instead, the pitcher lobs a deceptive 65 miles per hour changeup. So that's slower. The batter swings far too early and strikes out. You watch in amusement and ask yourself how the batter can make $5 million a year and so misjudge a ball that to your uninvolved eye a little leaguer could hit. The difference is that while the batter's decision to swing begins prior to his full conscious appreciation that the pitcher has thrown a slow pitch, you have the luxury to see the ball's entire path toward the plate. By not being forced to immediately decide whether or not to swing, you see a batter being badly fooled by a pitch that doesn't fool you. Because there's more processes that need to happen for the batter. The basic neurobiological principle The basic neurobiological principle is that the need for an immediate response time reduces the accuracy of perception of incoming information. Though most of us aren't involved in high-speed sports, we all experience these limitations in the most crucial of daily activities, normal conversation. Indeed, conversation is as much a high-speed competition as a top-flight table tennis match. First, consider the act of listening. We are bombarded with the rapid presentation of individual phonemes strung together to make words, phrases, and sentences. Processing takes time. A word may not be initially decipherable. Only with further speech is it clarified. Think of how we listen to someone with a foreign accent or regional dialect. Or even me when I'm not enunciating. If you took that word in isolation, completely unrecognizable. But you don't really hear it maybe every time as sounding weird because it gets filled in a few words later with the right sound, sort of, or at least the memory of the sound, is that. We hold a phrase in short-term memory until it is put into context. Watch a modern speech recognition program in action, and you will see words being corrected as more information for their words is inputted. For example, in testing a new speech recognition program, I dictated the phrase, "no cuts, bruises, or lacerations." The program typed out no cuts, bruises, or lesser Asians. I tried to speak as slowly and distinctly as possible, but without success. It wasn't until I added the phrase, "the patient's x-ray showed a hairline fracture," that the program, after a pause of several seconds, corrected lesser Asian to laceration. The program needed more information to improve its accuracy. Our recognition of speech works in a similar manner. Over time, we build up massive neural networks that recognize letters, words, phrases, personal syntax, and so forth. Try dictating, "He's a wolf in cheap." Oh, try dictating, "He's a wolf in cheap clothing." The speech recognition program, if possessing the original phrase in its database, will keep typing "sheep's clothing." Unlike a computer-driven speech recognition program, we have the added benefit of seeing body language and gestures, all the nonverbal clues that give additional hints at meaning. By judging the speaker's delivery, the presence or absence of a smile or blank expression, we are able to determine whether the choice of words was intentional, a pun, or unintentional, a malapropism. This interpretation might take considerable additional time, after which we can correct our original impression. The pleasure of the unexpected punchline, or the misunderstood homonym, underscores how meaning is contextual and contingent upon what hasn't yet been said. Now visualize conversation as a means for the exchange of complex ideas, with each participant's response dependent upon whether or not he believes the idea is correct. Instead of throwing a fastball, each discussant is throwing an idea at the other. If the listener judges the idea as correct, he will not swing. He will accept the idea as is. If he thinks the approaching idea is incorrect, he will swing, formulate an immediate rebuttal, and/or interrupt the speaker to interject his correction. Here's the wind-up, and here's the thought. The listener's decision as to the thought's correctness will be based upon a quick glimpse of the idea leaving the other's lips, snap judgments of body language, size, gestures, facial expressions, and all the various verbal and nonverbal contributions to interpretation of the spoken word. If the listener is forced to make a quick response, the decision as to the thought's correctness will be subject to the same physiological restraints as a batter's assessment of an incoming pitch. Nevertheless, due to the subjective backward referral of time, the listener will feel that he fully considered the idea before deciding on its correctness. But I won't try to tell anyone about that because it'll just be the same thing as the Challenger thing. The equivalent of Barry Bonds believing that he can see the ball in a quarter-size strike zone before initiating a swing. A great baseball player bats 300. A 300 conversationalist is strictly minor league. How different conversation sounds when we don't feel obliged to respond. As uninvolved spectators luxurying in our more leisurely processing time, we easily see the shallowness, evasiveness, and lack of real exchange of ideas in most dialogue. I promise you I see that in the dialogue. It's the bane of my existence. Hold on. Now I won't see it as easily with me, but I'll see any other person. I guess everybody maybe could say that. But no, I'll see it with me too sometimes. Or am I just thinking that now? Cognitive dissonance resolution. Who knows? We know better than to trust most on-the-fly conversations. We gripe about sound bites and MTV emphasis on quickness of response over dead air silences. We cringe. This was a better time, man. We're cringing. We cringe at the obvious non-responsive answers that characterize presidential candidate debates. But nothing changes. Sadly, the problem is at least in part a matter of the physiology of conversation. As we move from silent observer to active discussant, we become mired in the very processing problem we're trying to overcome. Given the time constraints of rapid-fire conversation, that's what you need, pen and paper, bro. How many videos have I said this in? Never had a real conversation because I know I'll have a real conversation because there will be pen and paper involved with the statements, with the essic, the question, the statements involved, the kesses, the sex of the kesses. We'll invent Manalaris. Given the time constraints of rapid fire conversation, the feeling of knowing will be triggered prior to full perception of the incoming idea, yet feel as though it followed consideration of the idea. At the short end of the temporal spectrum, it is possible to see how such subjective backward referral of the feeling of knowing, backward referral, is that what he's been calling it? Has he, I don't think he's been, let's call it that, backward referral. That's good. I mean, not us. Let's use that. Great. Backward referral. Time. What's it called? Backdating. Perceptual backdating. Perceptual backdating or something. Okay. So at the short end of the temporal spectrum, it is possible to see how much subjective backward, is that what I wrote? Yeah, backward referral of the feeling of knowing might lead to erroneous conclusions. But temporal illusions also occur over a much longer time span, which brings us to a critical question. When does a thought begin? With the baseball example, we can detect an altered perception of the sequence of events because we can measure the speed of the ball as well as the conduction velocities of electrical impulses within the central and peripheral nervous system. But how are we to measure the timing of a thought? The feeling of knowing can follow a thought Quote, what is Ima Klutz's phone number? End quote. Scenario C from the beginning of this chapter. You check the telephone directory and find 5 identical names and numbers. You try the first, not knowing whether or not it's correct. When Ima answers, you immediately know that the number is correct. The feeling of knowing follows hearing Ima's voice on the phone. But once we leave the simplest cause and effect examples, we are on thin ice. The emergence of a complex thought involving new associations can vary from milliseconds to decades. I might pass a woman in the street today and suddenly tomorrow, or so it seems, remember a girlfriend from long ago. The time for germination of an idea for a new book can be years. Until a thought reaches awareness, it is inaccessible to standard scientific measurements, a silent traveler invisible within the hidden layer. Interesting. But we can try some simple thought experiments to see if we can draw any conclusions. Izzy Nuts lives at 123 Filbert Street. You have been invited for dinner, but have never been to his house. You are driving along Filbert Street when you see the signpost for 123 in 123 period. In this example, we have a pretty good idea of when we thought, that's 123 Filbert. And when we knew that the thought was correct, you perceive the 123 sign and then say, that's it. Now consider an alternative tale. You've been to Izzy's house 20 years ago with your wife and think that you remember it quite clearly. This time it is dark and stormy. The street signs in the neighborhood have been blown down. No problem, you tell your wife. I remember his house like the back of my hand. Anyone who's ever traveled with a spouse knows how this story will turn out. After much bickering, you pull it onto a street that looks just like the Filbert Street of your memory. Trust me, you say to your wife who is contemplating the single life. You see a house that looks exactly like Izzy's. There it is, what I tell you. Are you sure? Your wife asks. It's not at all like I remember it. Yes, I know this is the house. This is the house. This is the fucking house, bitch. No, my dad said that. That's the vibe, I guess. You get out, ring the doorbell, and are told by the occupant that this is not even Filbert Street. Izzy lives 1 block over. Back in the car, your wife shrugs in disgust while you try to shake the strange idea that the man inside the house is wrong. No, this is fucking it. It must be Izzy's. It's just as you remember it. I guess I was wrong, you admit reluctantly. And then add, I could have sworn it was his house. Still not entirely convinced. In this case, when did you know that it was Izzy's house? 20 years ago, you and Izzy spent the evening in his living room. At that time, you had overwhelming evidence that the house was Izzy's. Being essential to the learning process, the feeling of correctness merged with the memory of the evening to form the neural network that represents Izzy's home. Imagine this network functioning like an old telephone switchboard in which several circuits are connected as in a party line. There's not a bit of privacy. The circuits remain in constant communication. Everyone hears everyone else. The image of the house and knowing cannot get away from each other. No, we're not integrated. Not everyone hears everyone else. But yes, there is some connection, of course, in the brain. So this is what we call spill. The image of the house, or co-living, and knowing cannot get away from each other. Is this what we call spill? 20 years later, both are activated when you see the house that is similar to the stored image of Izzy's place. 20 years later, both are activated when you see the house that is similar to the stored image of Izzy's place. The felt sequence is that you see the house and then say to yourself, yes, that one is Izzy's. No other timing would make sense. Imagine how confused you'd be if the feeling occurred before you felt that you saw the house. It's like, oh yeah, I'm looking at it. And yet, it was the 20-year-old feeling of knowing that allowed you to recognize the house that you then said must be Izzy's. Despite being an everyday event, temporal reordering remains poorly understood. Temporal reordering. Oh, okay. Without implying that we have a clue as to the underlying anatomy or physiology, conceptually there must exist a central time synchronization mechanism. Though this cumbersome mouthful tells us nothing about specific brain activity, it does help us to recognize that internal brain time may not be an accurate reflection of external time. I won't say anything if you know what I'm talking about. That's cool. and that the brain is capable of smoothing out internal-external time discrepancies to suit its own purposes. For those thoughts that activate prior thoughts and memories, we cannot know what portion of thought is presently being formed, what is being remembered, or when the feeling of knowing occurred. What might seem like cause and effect, A before B and causing C, cannot always be trusted to be the correct sequence of events. Brain time has its own agenda. Awesome. Another fantastic day. How are you guys feeling? And you know what? Oh, that's what I was going to say earlier. I say to comment, but please don't. I want us to just have this journey together. Now, the real reason I'm saying this is because if I keep asking you to comment, nobody's commenting. It's going to be very difficult for me to maintain the idea that I'm socializing right now. So I'm figuring if I say that, then that'll make it easier for me to. Yeah, so guys, don't comment. But actually, do comment, though. But I'm not going to expect a comment. Whether you comment or not, you are there, and we love each other, so that's good.